been watching you. When Reagan went to Greenland, he saw the heart machine. My mother's Eisenhower and my father's an icebox. Have you ever seen a portal? Follow my voice. Glip, glop, glibble. Have you ever seen a portal? I'm the man in the mirror, man. You look in the mirror, you see me, man. When Reagan went to Greenland, they turned off the heart machine, man. Have you ever seen a portal? There we go. Oh no, man. Oh no. Oh no, man. Oh no, man. I'm the man in the mirror, man. What happened, man? Have you ever seen a portal? Toast, toast, toast. Check, check. Check, check. Toast, toast, toast. Check, check. How are we doing? Hello, everyone. Hopefully the volume's okay. Are we good? Are we good? Yeah, maybe the headphones done it. Maybe the headphones done it. Maybe the headphones done it. Are we doing all right? Hopefully we're good. Toast, toast, toast. Check. What's up, y'all? We're back. Let me know if we got a delay. Do we still got a wicked delay? Should be all right. Let me check here. Let me check. Hold on a sec. All right, well, that's not good. Got a wicked delay here. Dang, I don't know what's going on. Uh-oh. 5-second delay. All right, give me a second. Give me a second. I'm going to go back into it. Here we go. Here we go with the volume problems. Great way to get back to it. Great way to get back to it. Okay, give me a second here. Let me see if I can get it to work, okay? All right, let me see if I can get it to work. Give me a second here. Check, 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 check. Toast, toast, toast. Check, check. Check, 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 check. Check, check, check. Yo, all right. All right. Hopefully there's not too bad of a delay. If the delay is too bad, if it's too bad, then I'll just put it on audio only because I'm not sure what's going on. So let me know if the delay is too bad. The breaks are by ROXG, our friend. Put the link up in the video description. Check him out. Let me know if it's too bad. Of course, we get back to it after 2 weeks. This is what happens. Okay, so it shouldn't be too bad. Hold on. Okay, all right. Well, I'm just going to do audio. I'm just going to do audio only because I can't fix the delay here. All right, so look. So I'll be going back into video in a little bit. But tonight, we're covering Chaos by Charles Manson, CIA and the Secret History of the 60s. Hopefully you guys can hear me good. You can hear me all right. And this is a great book. This is by this is by Tom O'Neill. Yep, I've got the headphones plugged in the whole time. So it's probably a new device here. Something's rocking too hard here on me. Well, let me see if I can unplug them real quick. Give me one more second, you guys. I'm sorry, but we're coming back after 2 weeks, and of course we're bound to have boomer tech problems. Give me a second. I'll edit it out when we get back to it. So let me see if this will work. Okay. All right. Let's see. Yeah, this might work. Okay. 1 second. All right, this might work. Are we back? That might go. Check. Toast. Sound is good. Check. Bang on. Are we good now? We good? There we go. We got it. All right, 100. We're all there. Hey, thanks for sticking with me, folks. All right, so let's go. Dang. Boomer teching in real life. All right, so let's go. Today we're covering Chaz Manson. Okay, Charles Manson, Chaos, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. This is a book by Tom O'Neill, published in 2019. And it's a crazy book. You know, we don't often do true crime or anything here, but this is a sort of a work of true crime, but it's kind of it's a bit like I think it's kind of gonzo journalism, but dialed back. So it's not exactly the man is in the story, right? And it becomes about the man himself. But you know, I think what happened here is that, as Tom O'Neill explains, he started to do a work, an article of investigative journalism for Premier magazine, and basically, he missed his deadline by about 20 years because he went very, very far. I hate to use the word very, but he went far into the story of Charles Manson. And basically, he found that, the story of Charlie was not what it seemed. And a lot of this is based on his interviews with Vincent Bugliosi. Now, as a prerequisite, we've done a couple of books that this is sort of based on. And one is... Actually, one is the book Don DeLeo Libra, Donda's book Libra, which we did about a year ago. This is an excellent book. It's a book of it's a postmodern pastiche. It's a postmodern narrative work of fiction that parallels the big JFK event. Okay. So this is actually mentioned in the book. I would you got to go back and watch this stream that we did. It was on the cathedral of intelligence and the data spew that he discusses in this book. Also, we haven't covered Helter Skelter here, but I would think anybody in this area has probably read Helter Skelter. If you haven't, you should go back and read it. It is the book that began true crime. It's really the true crime tome. And then another one is Fatal Vision. Fatal Vision is I got it up there somewhere. That's about Jeffrey McDonald and the Green Beret murders at Fort Bragg. And you should go and check that. Of course, the book is named for the line in Macbeth, "Art thou not fatal vision, dagger of the mind," right? And it's about Ted Gunderson was involved in that, and it was about the Green Beret murder of his family, and then the guy who got off, Jeffrey McDonald. Then now he's locked up. But it's it's about an 800-page book. But what you should really check out, I would recommend that you check out this book. This is a good book, and it's worth diving into. I mean, for one of the things that he does pretty cleverly here is he constantly says, I'm going to check the sources. I'm going to go, I don't care about. I'm not a journalist. I don't, we do literature here, but he checks sources and he goes back and forth into the data, right? And he has copious endnotes. There are parts of it that bother me as far as the endnotes are concerned. For instance, when you start using endnotes, there are quotes in the book that I go, I go to the endnotes and I go, okay, where'd the quote come from? And the endnote becomes more about the note that is cited is where he heard where he was when he first thought of the quote or heard of the quote, or how we know of the connection, instead of the person who actually said the quote. So that bothers me at times, especially when you have a book that's supposed to be based on the endnotes itself and on the data with this. But it's so wide ranging and so far. So what I thought we would do is just kind of dive into it. And I'm going to be reading pretty large sections of the book, but he starts off, basically, the first words in the book are talking about Vincent Bugliosi, and what he basically makes clear is that the story is not just to let you know, there's no real conclusion. There's there's really no way we're ever going to find out the truth of this thing, because it's buried in the quagmire giggity of all of the information and all of the various conspiracies at the time. But the book is about the 10050 Cielo Drive murders, Charlie Manson, the family, also dealing with MHChaos, the CIA program to infiltrate and destroy some of the left-wing movements, even though those are also, as it talks about, founded by CIA. And then Cointelpro ties into this in a big way, with the FBI's Cointelpro program, MLK, RFK, JFK, various other conspiracies. MKUltra plays into this, and also NIM, the National Institute for Mental Health. And there are characters in this that I'd forgotten about. Now, another couple books that deal with this would be that you would check out if you're interested in this. Would be, of course, Dave McGowan's Program to Kill, which I've got on the shelf up there behind me. Dave McGowan's Weird Scenes Inside the Inside the Canyon, which is based on, obviously, the Doors lyrics. Weird Scenes Inside the Gold Mine, Jim Morrison. Also, I've got Jim Morrison's one of his biographies right up here somewhere, which is the Jerry Hopkins biography. Jerry Hopkins went to Washington and Lee in Virginia. And I've talked about No One Here Gets Out Alive. And my own entrance into this is based off, I've got so many books here. If I move even a little bit, you guys, stacks and stacks of books will fall off. We've got the books here. And they'll just fall down. So I'm trying not to move too much here. But my own entryway into this was, of course, reading Helter Skelter in the 6th grade. Well, actually, I read it in the 7th grade. So what happened was, just a little bit of my own story here, was that my parents had a copy of Helter Skelter, a paperback copy, on the library shelf at home. And I remember my dad's gigantic library, opening it up and seeing the epigraph in the book, and it says, The book you will about, it's not really an epigraph, but it's the quote at the beginning of the book. It's not from another literary work, but it says, the book you're about to read will scare the hell out of you. And that scared me. That scared me in sixth grade. But I wanted to know. I would look at the pictures, and I'd look at the pictures of the family. And, of course, I'd look at, my friend and I would quiz each other on who was Zero, right? Who's Tex Watson? Where did he come from? I don't know. I guess that's something you do when you're in sixth grade, man. But I asked my sixth grade teacher, Miss Lewis, if I was allowed to read the book. I don't know why I needed to ask her to be allowed to do it. But I remember asking her, can I please read this book? And she said, no, we stick to Treasure Island. And she said, take out your books. And she wore a cast the whole year because she punched the desk one time and it broke her hand. Shouts out to Token Study right there with 199. Says James Joyce kissed Cormac in real life. Okay. And so thank you for that 199 super chat. And so then I got to seventh grade and I had a bass teacher named Mr. Bruner. And that's interesting because Charlie had a baby with a woman named Mary Brunner, spelled slightly different than Mary Bruner. And of course I talked about how that seventh grade English teacher, he was babysat by Tom Wolfe when he was young. Tom Wolfe was a teenager. He ended up teaching at the same school where I went. But so I said, it was his first year teaching, and I brought him a copy of Helter Skelter. This is the very beginning of seventh grade, and I said, can I read this book? And he said, yeah, man, far out. Of course you can read that book. So I dove into Helter Skelter in seventh grade, and I read it. It's a huge book. I reread it again in college. But reading that book in seventh grade led me on to various other books because I mentioned before to you guys how he got me a copy of No One Here Gets Out Alive and Hammer of the Gods, the Doors biography and Jim's biography and Led Zeppelin biography. And that's good for reading in seventh grade, and I went on from there. But anybody who knows anything, especially in this area of conspiracy, knows that the Charlie Manson murders are certainly strange. We can just say that, right? Look at your game, girl. Living in a delusion. Living in a confusion. Frustration and doubt. Can you ever live without a game? Remember how Guns N' Roses covered Look at Your Game, Girl as the secret hidden song on the Spaghetti Incident. And, of course, I also made my way into Charlie because into Charlie Manson territory because in middle school, the song Estranged came out, and remember Axl was wearing the shirt that said Charlie Don't Surf with a picture of Charlie on it. Right? So that led me into, who's this guy? What's he talking about? And of course, that ties in with Charlie Don't Surf from Apocalypse Now. You want to wait around here for 6 hours? That area's it's kind of hairy, sir. It's Charlie's point. Charlie Don't Surf. We've done an Apocalypse Now analysis here. It's one of my biggest analyses, Apocalypse Now. I did with my friend Rollin. But this area is so strange because there is so much tied into it. And there are many characters in this book that are mentioned. Especially, we're going to focus on a guy named Reeve Whitson. And then, of course, this guy, Jimmy Shaver. Both of which tie into MKUltra territory. If I say it's safe to surf this beach, Captain, it's safe to surf this beach. But he starts off with Vincent Bugliosi and talking about interviews with him. And what I realized, and I think I got this from Tom O'Neill, one of his statements elsewhere, was that it's very strange how Vincent Bugliosi's personality can be summed up in a way with being similar to Don Trump. Listen, I don't know what he said in his testimony. I walked in, I said, this is very good testimony. I said, we're going to use this testimony. And they had very similar personalities. Vincent Bugliosi actually ended up running for office, and he was discredited in that run because it turns out that he had been allegedly he had been stalking one of his wife's milkman, and we're going to get to that part. But there were parts of Terry Melcher's testimony that he left out, and when Tom O'Neill went back to the drawing board, he went through all the documents, and there were parts that were crossed out. And they were purposely crossed out, not just redacted, but crossed out where he could still read the testimony, or that he just left out. And he says, why did he leave this part of the testimony out? This would prove that Terry Melcher committed perjury in a murder trial. So he says in the book. And so we're going to dive into that. We're going to dive into the various parts of the family. And he basically starts off, the first words in the book are Vincent Bugliosi was on another tirade because at the end of this first meeting he has a long time ago, this is Tom O'Neill, the author of this book. He says that he's talking to Vincent Bugliosi and he basically says, I think it's decided that you and I are enemies now. We should consider ourselves adversaries. Right. But he says, nothing can be worse than accusing a prosecutor of doing what you're implying that I did in this case. He barked at me. It's extremely, extremely defamatory. It was a sunny day in February 2006, and we were in the kitchen of his Pasadena home. The place was Corey with floral patterns, overstuffed furniture, and literally a white picket fence out front, all belying the hostility erupting within its walls. Bugliosi wanted to sue me. It would be, he soon warned, $100 million libel lawsuit, one of the biggest lawsuits ever in the true crime genre. If I refused to soft pedal my reporting on him, I'd be powerless to stop it. I think we should view ourselves as adversaries, he told me later. Vince, I was on a first name basis with him, as I guess adversaries must be, was a master orator. And this was one of his trademark perorations. Our interview that day dragged on for more than 6 hours. You want to stay around here for 6 hours? And he did most of the talking, holding forth as expertly as when he had prosecuted the Charles Manson trial more than 35 years before. What he's going to go on to say here, basically, is that, yes, I've got my shawl collar professorial sweater on today. Today, we'll be doing ASMR, talking about Charlie Manson, drinking Red Bull, having a nice night, talking about, have you ever seen a portal? I keep saying that because, just as a tangent here, please go back and check out my, it's been 2 weeks. It's been over 2 weeks since we've been here, and I haven't been absent. Anybody who knows, I haven't been MIA. In fact, I've been doing a lot of work, and you can see me on Boiler Room multiple times. We've done a few different Boiler Room appearances, and we also recently did our appearance with Made by Jim Bob. Please go and check out the video description. There's a link in there going to Made by Jim Bob's Rockfin channel. You can check out our analysis of Donnie Darko. And I really got to say, I'm really proud of that one. It's one of my best analyses, I think. We did a really good deep dive into Donnie Darko, all things Donnie Darko. The January 2001 film with Jake Gyllenhaal, and it's a tough nut to crack. It's a tough nut to crack, folks. I said we're gonna watch Donnie Darko. It's gonna be a tough nut to crack. I said to myself, it's gonna be a tough nut to crack. No, I don't drink whiskey. If I did, I'd be drinking Bushmills, but I don't drink whiskey. And so please go back and watch that Donnie Darko analysis. And if you liked that, guess what? You have a special treat because I can announce that Jim Bob and I will be doing another analysis very soon. It will be coming up on Saturday. I don't think it's this Saturday, but maybe next Saturday. And that is The Truman Show. We'll be doing a deep dive into The Truman Show, the excellent Jim Carrey film with Ed Harris and Christo, right? Gnostic film. And we'll be doing a lot more films. We're going to be doing short form and long form films, and a lot on the way with our friend Jim Bob out there. Also, please check out my part 1 of Peter Pan deep dive analysis with our good friend, our brilliant friend Jamie Henshaw Dyer, over on her channel on YouTube. We did a part 1 analysis of Peter Pan, the book. We did, we did Peter Pan. We did Pan, the Hugh Jackman film. And this week we'll be doing a lot more. We have a part 2 coming up. We're going to, I guess, record it on Friday. You'll probably hear it or see it on Sunday. We'll be doing an analysis of the Arthur Machen book, The Great God Pan. And we'll be talking about the prayer that was offered at Al Crowley's eulogy was the great god Pan. We'll be doing an analysis of Pan's Labyrinth, Hook with Dusty Mothman, Peter Pan and Wendy, Pan's Labyrinth, a few different Rimbaud poems, including The Fawn's Head and Antique, Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath, and their obsession with this demonic entity that possessed Ted Hughes called Pan, the poem Pan by Ted Hughes. There's a lot in there. I wouldn't be surprised if we go into a part 3, but we'll be doing all that coming up this weekend. So if you like to hear that, that's what we've been doing over the past 2 weeks, a lot of stuff. And I've got a lot coming up on this channel, but we'll talk about that later. So back to chaos. What we basically learned is that some of the testimony was left out, or if it was left out, it would certainly kill some of the testimony that was put into the record, or it would contradict it. And there's a lot that has to do with Louis Jolly and West. And basically what we learn is that what was there was a narrative that was put into the trial. Remember, this is like one of the longest trials in U.S. history. The longest trial, I think, is the McMartin preschool trial. And then we had the juice is loose. Hey, be careful with that. That's my lucky stabbing cap, says Norm about the juice is loose trial. And then, of course, there's the 9 month plus Charlie Manson trial. And there's just so much about it that was either left out or that was changed. And we can see Tom O'Neill's thesis, in a way, I mean, one of the parts of the thesis is that basically that this is a narrative that was sort of contrived and created by Vincent Bugliosi, mainly centering on the helter-skelter aspect of it. So just to put this bluntly and clearly, now that we're, how long are we into this? 37 minutes in. One of the things that he says about this is that the helter-skelter narrative, that there would be a RACE war, and that was the motive for the murders at Cielo Drive and of Rosemary and Ted LaBianca, that this was contrived, that this wasn't the actual motive. Now, he says Charlie had talked about this, and that was one of the things that the family always discussed, but it wasn't the motive for the murders itself, and that the motives for the murders seemed to be based around MKUltra and something dealing with intelligence and drugs. Okay, now this hinges on these characters, Reeve Whitson, who, as he points out here, is it possible? There's no proof, but is it possible that when the murders occurred the first night at Cielo Drive, that Charlie actually did go to Cielo Drive with this guy, Reeve Whitson, and rearrange some of the bodies? Because Terry Melcher, for instance, as part of his testimony, says that, he met Charlie Manson, and that after the murders, he never met him again. But he makes clear that actually he did. He actually did meet him after this. And this was in the records. So we're going to look into that. And one of the things, I'm just going to skip here to, in the first chapter here, or in the introduction. First of all, the epigraph that I put to the stream occurs on page 329. It's pretty interesting. 329E. And he says here, let's see, he says here that as Bugliosi, let me turn this up a little bit. Is that a little better? Is that a little bit louder? As Bugliosi explained it to me in our first meeting in 1999, Manson had somehow learned that a select few of his followers were willing and able to kill. Something in the quote, something in the deepest resources of their soul enabled them to do something that you and I cannot do, he said to me that day. Quote, there was something independent of Charles Manson that was coursing through them. These people not only killed for him, but they did it with gusto, with relish. 169 stab wounds, some of them post-mortem. What does that show? I think it's circumstantial evidence that some people have much more homicidal tendencies than others. And then the other one is, let's see. Oh, page 405. This is the Mirror Man. This is interesting because this is part of my work for my own book that I'm working on, Monarch. And I've given you multiple times the quote from Julius Caesar, which I have right over here. But if I take time to look for it, I know it'll take too much time. So in Julius Caesar, remember they're talking. Cassius is talking to Brutus, and they're talking about, can you see yourself? Oh no, only in a mirror. And then Charlie Manson here says that's one of the things for my book Monarch, because the villain of the book, or the protagonist / villain of the book, is going to be Mirror Man, right? A guy who wears a mask of his own face with mirror shards for eyes and kills with a mirror shard. This is also part of Thomas Harris's book, Red Dragon. And remember, that's in the film. But here he says on page 405E something that Manson would often repeat. It says, to present our back and forth in granular detail would be excruciating. Reading through the transcript never fails to give me a headache. Suffice it to say that the subject, see how it's in the first person? This book is in the first person. It reads like an autobiography, or like a belles lettres, or even like a novel. But it's because it's this commentary on his own process, right? Also, please smash that like, and please consider super chatting. Bring in those super chats. You can dono chat. The link is in the description of the video. You can super chat, and you can also get you can also support me directly, and you can just smash that like. I'd appreciate it. He says, suffice it to say that the subject of Terry Melcher always riled him up. Anything and everything else he hardly cared for. If it didn't involve him directly, he had no use for it. He reiterated that he was the fairest prosecutor in the land, and that a hefty $100 million lawsuit awaited me if I suggested otherwise. $100 million lawsuit, says Bugliosi. This is when he fell into the refrain about the man in the mirror, because he was ethical to an unprecedented degree. He could live with the sight of his own reflections. He didn't understand how I could live with mine. Manson himself had a fondness for the same phrase. I'm the man in the mirror, he said. Anything you see in me is in you. I am you. And when you can admit that, you will be free. What's also interesting is that it's around this part where we finally get an interview with Charlie Manson, and he says to Tom O'Neill, you know, I'm Vincent Bugliosi's godfather. So funny. It says, it was a rare moment of self-awareness, probably the last I ever saw on him. When Bugliosi and I finished it last, he confessed he was sometimes obsessive and overreactive. Gail had told him he might have a psychiatric disorder, but he'd done nothing wrong. He didn't want his admittedly frenetic behavior to color my impressions of his conduct as a professor, because he knows that he's writing this book about him. It was a rare moment of self-awareness, probably the last I ever saw on him. The aftermath of our meeting was a series of alternating coaxing and acrimonious phone calls at all hours of the day and night, conveying a thinly veiled ultimatum. I could drop anything negative about him from my book or fear his wrath. If I published such outrageous, preposterous, and unbelievable lies, the lawsuit was a foregone conclusion. So, going back to the beginning here, first of all, there's a description of Tex Watson here. And this occurs on page 16. I'm going to go pretty far into the details here. Okay. So strap yourselves in, folks. It says, in the passenger seat, it's page 16 of the book, was Linda Kasabian, 20, from New Hampshire. She played basketball in high school, but she dropped out and got married. The union lasted 6 months. Not long after, in Boston, she was arrested in a narcotics bust, and by the spring of 1968, she'd remarried, had a kid, and moved to Los Angeles. She sometimes introduced herself as Yana the Witch. This is before the murders took place, before even the meeting with the family. And at the wheel, this is talking about the night of the murder, was Charles Tex Watson, who's, in my opinion, Tex Watson is often the least discussed in terms of these books. And in terms of the general investigation, Tex Watson is the main actual killer in the event, even in terms of the court case. Tex Watson he just recently had another parole denied in Texas, and he runs some sort of prison, chat. He's like a prison chaplain, and he's part of like the Rainbow Church or something like that. But he's an interesting character here, and it says, at the wheel was Charles Tex Watson, 23, 6'3", from East Texas. Watson had been a Boy Scout and the captain of the high school football team. He sometimes helped his dad, who ran a gas station and a grocery store. He's in prison in Texas because after the murders, he left and went back to Texas. At North Texas State University, he joined a fraternity and started getting stoned. Hey, bros, my name's Tex Watson. What are you guys doing? You guys going to be Kappa Alphas also? You know, he wasn't a KA, but, whoa, it'd be really groovy if we went off to California and did something to these hippies. And it says, soon he dropped out, moved to California, and got a job as a wig salesman. One day, as a wig salesman. I'm sorry, but that is fun. That's the absurdity of that is funny, right? Because can you imagine Charles Tex Watson as a wig salesman? It reminds me of Roger Smith from American Dad. And by the way, there's a character named Roger Smith who pops up in this. He's one of the nefarious characters who deals with the murders. But also how synchro that he actually, one of the guys that he kills is Jay Sebring. And Jay Sebring, one of the victims in the Cielo Drive murder, is the guy that the Warren Beatty's shampoo is based on him. He's like the first celebrity hairstylist, and there's a lot in this book about him. Suffice it to say that he may have been, there's no way to prove it, but he may have been involved in satanic rituals and other 8mm type rituals that occurred at Cielo Drive, which may have been one of the driving forces for the murder. Okay. Same with Roman Polanski. There's a lot of talk in the book about how he was involved in these sort of 8mm film things that went on, and that he forced Sharon Tate to have pervert stuff go on to her on film at Cielo Drive, and that one of the guys, there was actually a dealer that came to the house that they tied up and they did things to, and that he was one of the first suspects in the murders. I know this may seem kind of all over the place, but so is the book, because that's the nature of the investigation that occurs here. It says, that night in the Ford, all four were dressed in black from head to toe. None of them had a history of violence. They were part of a hippie commune that called itself the Family, living in isolation at Spawn Ranch, whose mountain is 500 acres, and film sets at once provided dramatic backdrops for Western-themed movies and TV shows. The Family had assembled a new age bricolage of environmentalism, anti-establishment politics, free love, and apocalyptic Christianity, rounded out with a vehement rejection of conventional morality. More than anything, they lived according to the whims of their leader, the 34-year-old Charles Mills Manson, who had commanded them to take their trip that night. Remember in Apocalypse Now, Charles Miller Manson, man, far out. It's Mills. And also, Helter Skelter, this book says that Charlie was 5'6", but Helter Skelter says he was 5'2". The four arrived. He was definitely a small guy. The four arrived at 10050 Cielo Drive. By the way, remember the site of the murders was actually the Cielo Drive house was actually where what's his name, Trent Reznor and Flood recorded the Downward Spiral. Was it the Downward Spiral they recorded there? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but they recorded Nine Inch Nails songs there before it was finally demolished and the address was changed. Rudy Altobelli, who owned the house and rented it out, lived there for a long time, but I don't think he went back there afterwards. But it was rented out for that album to be recorded. It says, the four arrived at Cielo Drive, where the actress Sharon Tate lived with her husband, the filmmaker Roman Polanski. He was away in London at the time scouting locations for The Day of the Dolphin, a movie in which a dolphin is trained to assassinate the President of the United States. Right? Remember John C. Lilly and the dolphin experiments? Which sounds so ridiculous in Sixties as a movie title, but then again, this is the stuff that they were involved with at the time, which is crazy. The drive to Cielo would have taken about 40 minutes. It was just after midnight when they arrived, and Benedict Canyon was quiet, seemingly worlds away from the hustle and sprawl of Los Angeles. The house was built in 1942, and it belonged to a French actress who'd modeled it on the Norman country estates of her youth. A long, low rambler at the end of a cul-de-sac, invisible from the street. It sat on 3 acres of bucolic, isolated land, nestled against a hillside on a bluff. It afforded views of Los Angeles glittering to the east and Bel Air's Folsom Estates unfurling to the west. On a clear day, you could see straight to the Pacific 10 miles out. All of them were carrying buck knives. Watson had a .22 buntline revolver. Remember, he said he was the devil and he was there to do the devil's business. We covered Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Was a big stream for us. We did the book version of the film. So we've covered the kind of fairy tale version of the ending of that, which it's a fairy tale because the murders don't happen, and the bad guys end up getting killed. Kasabian remained on the outskirts, keeping watch, and the other three crept up the hill toward the secluded estate. What did I say? Where's the note marking who heard him say this? Oh, okay. This is one thing that bothered me. All right, so this is page 18. It says, at the top of the driveway, they found Stephen Parent, an 18-year-old who'd been visiting the caretaker in the guest house to sell him a clock radio. He was sitting in his dad's white Rambler, having already rolled his window down to activate the gate control. Watson approached the driver's side and pointed the revolver at his face. "Please don't hurt me. I won't say anything." Parent screamed, raising his arm to protect himself. Watson slashed his left hand with the knife, slicing through the strap of his wristwatch. Then he shot Parent 4 times in his arm, his left cheek, and twice in his chest. Parent died instantly, his blood beginning to pool in the car. Okay, so my question is, if he is quoted as saying that, "Please don't hurt me, I won't say anything," then let's find the footnote for who reported him saying that, right? So, page 18, and the end note, Chapter 1, Crime of the Century, number 18, page 18, it says, at the top of the driveway, they found Stephen Parent. I uncovered ample evidence suggesting that Parent's relationship with William Garrison was significantly different than the one depicted at the trial in Helter Skelter, including the purpose of his visit to the guest house on August 8th, 1969. But it doesn't give a source for who. Look, do you get my logic here? My logical problem with this? This is my problem at the beginning of the book. I'm not criticizing the rest of the book. I'm just saying, if the book is about sources, if the whole thing is dealing with sources, right, then my problem is why, if we have a man quoted as saying this and he gets killed, there can only be 2 people who heard him say this that are mentioned. One is Tex Watson, and the other is the guy that's dead. Unless somebody in the family reported him saying this. But my point is, who did it? Who reported him saying this? I don't understand, because all we get is an end note saying that he said those words. Am I too loud here, by the way? Am I doing all right? It seems to be redlining for me, so tell me if my audio is all right. But my point is, there's nobody else who can say that he said this, because we don't have Rudy Altobelli pointing it out. Who reported him saying this stuff? Why not just put it in the end notes? That bothers me. It says the 4 shots rang out through Benedict Canyon, but no one in the house at 1050 Cielo seemed to hear him. And this brings up another point, which is that it's interesting that there were so many other people killed, right, as a result of just the murder. So we have Gary Hinman, who was killed, and then Bobby Beausoleil goes to prison for that. We have the guy in the car at the beginning. We have there were I think 2 people found on Spawn Ranch who were dead. One is covered in where's my other? Oh, there's another excellent book on Manson. It's actually this book right here by Jeff Gunn called Manson that I read. This was I read this. That was right at the start of Karanka. I read that book. And there are excellent descriptions of, it's got Allen Ginsberg and the Human Being, Kenneth Anger, Bobby Beausoleil, the descriptions of the murder, the Straight Satans, political pig. Everything is sort of covered in that. Another example of a book that deals with Charles Manson through a sort of a parallel is this book about Darby Crash called Lexicon Devil, Darby Crash and the History of the Germs. This is a fantastic book if you're into music history, because he sees Darby Crash saw Charlie Manson in this sort of pantheon of singers who went from, they had a sort of a dark energy and went from being singers to being, I guess now you call them influencers, right? Which is kind of a lame term for what these people did, but more like cult heroes. I mean, he talks about Jim Morrison, and talks about, Antonin Artaud and the Theater of Blood, Theater of Cruelty. But that's another good book. It's another book about an LA phenomena, LA singer. And Darby Crash died the day before John Lennon, so his death kind of got lost in the mix. Then we get to talk about the La Biancas. One of the most interesting parts of this whole thing, by the way, is that what's often discussed is the Cielo Drive murder, right? Murders where we get, we have Jay Sebring, Abigail Folger, right? Sharon Tate, and Wojciech Frykowski are the 4 victims at the house. And we often get, discussions into who they were and what they were doing, like whether Wojciech Frykowski was a MDMA or MDM dealer at the time, some sort of Polish, expat who had other associates in organized crime in the United States. Abigail Folger obviously was the heiress to the Folger coffee fortune out of Colombia. Jay Sebring had something to do with cocaine trafficking. So Colombia, Jay Sebring, Satanist circles, also running with the straight Satans who were, pushing amphetamines. And then we have, and then Sharon Tate, who, it's not speculation. I'm just saying, like, look at the Fearless Vampire Hunters and then Roman Polanski's associations. And Roman Polanski had just made Rosemary's Baby. And obviously there are occult things going on with Roman Polanski. Now, someone hearing that might go, look, man, he just made a movie. Okay, yeah, he did just make a movie. But it's interesting that Roman Polanski's choice of movies are so, they seem to be so adept at occult situations and connections, and there's so much speculation about and rumor about what they were involved with before this. But the thing that's most interesting, I think, is the LaBianca murder. What was the LaBianca murder? Because they do this, and then a couple of nights later, they do the LaBianca. They murder these 2 random people, so-called random people, right? Rosemary and Lino LaBianca, who are just this old husband and wife couple in a house. Very strange. So, in other words, Tom O'Neill is going to posit, were these part of a larger hit? Were they a hit squad? Were these people functioning as some sort of hit squad? And did they have something to do with organized crime? This says on page 23, it says, let's see. Yeah, okay, so on page 22, this says, when Watson, Atkins, Krenwinkel, and Kasabian, Linda Kasabian, Patricia Krenwinkel, Susan Atkins, and Tex Watson, returned to the Spawn Ranch early that morning, they went to their beds and slept soundly. I was gone, Atkins later recalled. It was like I was dead. I could not think about anything. It was almost as if I passed out, blacked out, my head was blank. There was nothing in me. It was like I'd given it all, which is post-murder, but also sounds MK Ultra-ish, doesn't it? Sounds like Manchurian Candidate or Monarch territory. I'm just saying it sounds like that. At Cielo Drive was a scene of such callous, barbarous devastation that it shook something loose in the national psyche. August 8th, 1969 and August 9th, 1969 suddenly seemed to describe different realities. Isn't that what we've been saying about Big Nine, right? That's exactly the mentality that we've been saying about Big Nine. That, I've heard so many people over the past few weeks talk about how September 10th and the next day in 2001 were like completely different realities. It's almost like that day in September, caused a psychic rift in the sky, right? Like that was the real Y2K or something. Like that was. I'm not saying in terms of, we live in a simulated reality or that it was something like that, it's a computer simulation. I'm saying that the event is so big in terms of its blunt aesthetic terror that it causes it's like a blood ritual that causes a huge rift in the way that we have a national or global psychic break reaction to this mass death on screen, right? And this is the same sort of thing that occurs in 1969. It's almost as if it's purposeful, and it is purposeful in one way, at least on the very surface of the narrative of the court testimony, which is that they did it on purpose to cause this thing, to cause the struggle for helter skelter and then the end of the world. So that's what they say on the surface. So if it's true on the surface, then we have to look at the subtext and whether there's something deeper. And it says, media accounts were quick to infer something more sordid than ordinary homicide, something occult. One paper calls the murders a blood orgy. Others reported ritualistic slangs and overtones of a weird religious rite. Those are quotes. The facts were unavailable or misreported. Maybe drugs were involved. Maybe they weren't. Maybe Sebring had been wearing a black hood of a Satanist. Maybe he hadn't. The big picture was one of supernatural ruin. An officer on the scene said the bodies looked like mannequins dipped in red paint. Oh my God. Can you imagine? I mean, that's Dahmer. That's Dahmer territory. Another said, it's like a battlefield up there. Pools of blood had soaked into the carpets. According to Time magazine, stray bullets were lodged in the ceiling. In page 22, in Roman Polanski, whose films were errantly, even proudly occultist, the public found someone onto whom it could project its fatalism. A popular press account said that mere minutes before he learned of the murders, Polanski at a party in London had been discussing a friend's death. Quote, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, he said, who will be the next to go? With that, the phone rang, and he was summoned to hear that his wife and friends had been brutally murdered. Did you know that? Did you know that conversation took place right before that? Or at least was reported to take place by the person he was talking to? Isn't that crazy? It wasn't over. The next night at Spawn Ranch, the same group convened with 3 additions. There was the 18-year-old Steve Clem Grogan, a musician and a high school dropout, and the 19-year-old Leslie Van Houten, a former homecoming princess from Orange County who played the sousaphone in junior high school. And there was Charles Manson, their leader. The 7 of them piled into the beat-up Ford on a search for more victims. After nearly 3 hours of restive driving through Los Angeles and its environs, Manson finally settled on a home in Los Feliz in 3301 Waverly Drive. What's that show? Wizards of Waverly Place? Waverly Drive, next door to a house he'd once stayed in. That got DB Latreille. My little clip that went viral online. I'm not going to share it, but because it was me personally, not my handle. But my little homeboy DB Latreille is from Waverly, Virginia. That's synchro, bro. He broke into the house by himself, armed with a pistol and knife. Others maintained that he brought Tex Watson with him. In any case, he spotted Lino LaBianca, 44. A grocery store owner, asleep on the couch, a newspaper over his face. Lino's wife, Rosemary, 38, was in the bedroom. Rosemary was paranoid that people had been breaking in and moving their furniture around lately. And like the whole city, she was spooked by the Tate murders the previous night. That's interesting. So she's spooked that people have been gang stalking her. And this is actual gaslighting and gang stalking, right? We've discussed this before. Breaking into the house and moving furniture around slightly is like the MO of the TI, of what the TI reports, right? And of course, the Manson family was known for their, what do they call it? Creepy crawling. They did their creepy crawler thing, which was where they for fun, man. Here's what we're gonna do for fun, man. It's gonna be far out. Here's what we're going to do for fun, man. It's going to be super far out. You're all going to dress in black, man. Then we're going to go to these random houses. We're going to crawl around the floors, man, and see if they notice us. We're going to move the furniture around. But why this one house? Why this house in Los Feliz, Waverly Drive? Manson chose Watson and Krenwinkel again as his executioners. This time he added Van Houten to the mix. She'd never so much as struck another person before that night, and he told the 3 of them to go inside and kill everyone. They had only buck knives. They burst into the house, separated the couple, and stabbed Lino 26 times. They cut the word war into his stomach and impaled a carving fork beside it, its handle jutting out of his belly. They left a steak knife protruding from his throat. Rosemary suffered 41 stab wounds, many inflicted after she died. Before they left, the killer scrawled Helter Skelter in blood on the refrigerator. Misspelling the Beatles song Helter Skelter on the walls, they smeared Rise and Death to Pigs in Lino's blood. These are directions. These are occult words infused with power, obviously, and directions, right? Directions for what they would later say is for Helter Skelter, right? And for the oncoming race war. They're going to blame it they meant to blame it on the Black Panthers, is what they said. But Manson talked about how they needed to go back, and they may have gone back. He and this guy, Reeve Whitson, who was CIA, may have gone back and written the words afterwards. They need to leave their messages. There's another thing here about the misspell. I know that other people have gone into this pretty far. It's not really in this book so much. But the misspelling of the words is interesting because we get this. Remember, we got this in From Hell, right? This occurred with. This really did occur with. We remember we did a book on From Hell and Jack the Ripper. It was last Spooktober when I was on holiday down south. We did a book on. We analyzed a book on Jack the Ripper and talking about William Gull as the possible real Jack the Ripper and how the word was misspelled Jewes on the wall, written on the wall nearby. Yes, I'm talking about Alan Moore, and how the word seemed to be that, like remember From Hell, the film, they blame it on, this is obviously a misspelling because the people are uneducated, right? But John Depp says, and it's not misspelled by accident because they're uneducated. It's misspelled on purpose because this is the way that the script occurs in the Masonic guidebook. They're doing a Masonic ritual, right? Hiram Abiff. So I think there's something to that because Helter Skelter is spelled Heal, like heal, Helter Skelter, but it's misspelled for there's some sort of occult power that they misspell it that way purposefully. I don't know what it is. If you know about that, put it as best you can in the comments afterwards and abide by the toss, please. The bloodshed in its primitive defiance, a pregnant star slaughtered, a man perforated with kitchen utensils, confirmed a sense of rupture in America. I like Tom O'Neill's take on this. He's a capable writer. He says, the decade's subversive spirit had come on with too much fervor. Some reckoning was bound to come, or so it seemed in retrospect. The latent violence couldn't contain itself. The nation was immured in these events, in the motive, the manhunt, and then in 1970, the sensational 9.5 month long trial. 9.5 months, there you go. Interesting, 9.5 months. It's a 9.5 month trial, sort of in a weird way inverted or mimicking the lost pregnancy of Sharon Tate, right? Lost with the murders, and giving birth to a new America, a new globe, right? It's kind of like the fake quote, but it's a made up quote. But the Jack the Ripper quote, someday 1888 people will look back. Someday people will look back and say that I gave birth to the 20th century. Like this is giving birth to an NWO or something. Let's see. Even Truman Capote, who's in Cold Blood. I've got In Cold Blood sitting around here somewhere. I've been meaning to cover it for months now, and I still haven't gotten it, so we're going to cover that. Who's in Cold Blood was only a few years old, fell into the speculative fervor, appearing on The Tonight Show to provide a fantasy explanation of the murders. He blamed them on one person with the motive of fit of rage and a heaping portion of paranoia. Oh, well, that's part of it. And then we get into Joan Didion. And Joan Didion says, let's see, talk about the murders long enough and inevitably someone will bring up Joan Didion's famous remark from the White Album. The 60s ended abruptly on August 9th, 1969. The tension broke that day. The paranoia was fulfilled. There's the germ of truth in that, but the process wasn't so abrupt. It began that day, but it wasn't over really until December 1st, 1969, when the police announced the crimes had been solved and the nation got its first glimpse of the killers. Here was the final fulfillment of paranoia, the last gasp of 60s idealism. Of course, that comes from Joan Didion, right? And remember Joan Didion's slouching toward Bethlehem? Joan Didion also, was that? No, that was Susan Sontag with the jouissance. We talk about jouissance. It's Susan Sontag. Didion and Susan Sontag are sort of the same universe. There's also, on page 26, I wrote the note, hippie Gnostic theology. Because this says, let's see, cognitive dissonance. See, O'Neill is a good writer in this because he doesn't venture into overt conspiratorial writing. In fact, he tries to shy away from it and just go with objective events. He necessarily goes into it because it's part of the big conspiracy, but he doesn't go into theory. Right away, because it would seem to discredit what he's talking about in terms of his narrative. He has to go into it objectively speaking. And I like that because he's obviously it's funny because I get the sense that he started off a normie and ended up totally based about this thing because he couldn't help it because he was following the truth, right? It says the cognitive dissonance was intense. These weren't the faces of hardened criminals and I don't know about him personally. I'm just saying in terms of the book. Or hardened criminals or escaped lunatics. They were hippies, stereotypical flower children in the bloom of wide-eyed youth, the men unshaven and long-haired, wearing beads and buckskin jackets, the women in blue jeans and tie-dyed tops, no bras, their hair tangled and unwashed. They talked like hippies too, spouting an ethos of free love, eschewing monogamy and marriage in favor of sexual experimentation. They lived in roving communes, caravanning along the East Coast in Technicolor bright buses and clunkers cobbled together from square parts. They believed that hallucinogens strengthened their spirit and expanded their mind. Far out, man. They gave birth naturally and raised their children together in rustic simplicity. Here we go. In other words, page 26, in other ways, though, their philosophy was Gnostic, verging on theological. Time did not exist, they proclaimed. There was no good, no bad, and no death. All human beings were God and the devil at the same time and part of one another. In fact, everything in the universe was unified, one with itself. The family's moral code, insofar as it existed at all, was riven with contradictions. While it was wrong to kill animals, even the snakes and spiders in their bunkhouses had to be carefully spared. It was fine to kill people because human life was inherently valueless. To kill someone, this is from the book, was tantamount to breaking off a minute piece of some cosmic cookie, as Tex Watson later put it. If anything, death was something to be embraced because it exposed your soul to the oneness in the universe. Like in Peter Pan, right? Death is just another great adventure, right? Or, far out, man. Listen, there was that thing I remember reading this in 7th grade about Charlie in Helter Skelter, and it said that Charlie had this thing where if you walked, this is part of the programming, that Charlie said that if you walked outside, you had to avoid stepping on blades of grass. Okay. Because if you stepped on the blades of grass, if you looked at them microscopically, and if you looked at them in a microscope, man, you could see the blades of grass were all smiling. They were all smiling at the sun. They had little faces. Now there is a truth to that, which is weird, that if you've ever looked at blades of grass under a microscope, they do seem to have little faces, and they're smiling, but that's God's creation. But he said that, man, you can't step on the grass, man. You can step on a person, but you can't step on the grass. So when you go from here to the outhouse, right, you're going to need to carry me on your back, man. And if you step on a single blade of grass, I'm going to whip you. That's what he said. The tomatoes are crying, man. But it's okay to do this to human beings, he says, because they are inherently valueless, because we're all one, because you and Charlie's toenail are the same, right? I'm not your toenail, man. We're going to have Jesus and Lucifer on the same side of things, man. It reminds me of Arthur Grimsby, right? And the what is it, the final church of the Revelation? Which was Jay's covered this in so much detail, that it's a kind of a proto-Manson movement. They had Charlie even wrote and contributed to the magazine. But it was the London version. It was kind of an English version that they tested out before they got to the American version of this cult. Yeah, y'all talking about Hunter S. Thompson, the Hells Angels. I got that book right up there. And I've got Sonny Barger's autobiography as well. Let's see. Oh, they talk about the Bacchae and Pan and the Dionysian thrills at the bottom of 27. Let's see. On December 12th, it says, the nation still reeling from the indictments. A piece in Time magazine, in CIA Time magazine, drew specious parallels between hippies and violence. In the movement's invitation to freedom, the magazine warned criminals and psychotics blossomed as easily as innocents and pacifists did. But how, Time asked, could children who had dropped out for the sake of kindness and caring, love, and beauty be enjoined to kill? Well, Dr. Louis Yablonsky, a sociologist who'd written a book called The Hippie Trip, argued that many hippies were lonely, alienated people. Here we go. Even when they act as if they love, this is from Yablonsky, they can be totally devoid of true compassion. That is the reason why they can kill so matter-of-factly. Many hippies are socially almost dead inside. Some require massive emotions to feel anything at all. They need bizarre, intensive acts to feel alive. Sexual acts, acts of violence, nudity, every kind of Dionysian thrill. And then we get Charlie Manson, who describes himself as the mechanical boy. Now, one thing that this book right here is great about, that the book I'm covering, that Tom O'Neill's book is not great about because it doesn't really go into it that much. But this book, if you want to know about Charlie Manson, the person, this book is better for that because it talks about his early life. Did you know that he was at Boys Town? Charlie Manson was at Boys Town when he was very young. He was probably the victim of that thing that helped to break his mind. Of course, he had witnessed his mother as a prostitute being assaulted when he was very young. And also, he was in prison. Even by the time of the Manson murders, he had been in prison for 3/4 of his life. He'd been locked up. He was only out of lockup, a few times. So he called himself a victim of the state or a mechanical boy. I'm not saying this is sympathy for him. I'm just saying what he says in the book, right? And in fact, he was not far from here. He was locked up in a federal penitentiary, not far from where I am now. He was famous for that. He was in Virginia a couple times. But let's see. Yeah, federal reform in Virginia. It says that he was probably assaulted at Natural Bridge School in Virginia, Natural Bridge Honor Camp, where he was caught. He was caught raping a boy at knife point. So that's after that, right? A federal reformatory in Virginia. And then on page 30, we get the reading of The Bloodthirsty Robots. Let's see. Manson was often made out as an artful seeker, an evil Pied Piper, as one paper put it, with reserves of obscure power. He is like a modern-day Rasputin or a Svengali. That's in terms of his eyes. They spoke of their love and undying support for Charlie, whom they deemed the second coming of Christ and Satan in one, which is his sort of weird Gnostic theology. I watched the first television footage of Manson. Cameras followed as bailiffs led him to pretrial hearings, shackled, stooped, and glaring. I saw a few traces of his fabled charisma, but I understood how his unsocialized air of pseudo-mysticism and jailhouse aggression seemed authentic. Manson brought a rollicking exhibition of controlled insanity whenever he appeared before the bench. He quarreled before the judge, arguing that he should be allowed to represent himself. The girls, for their part, mimicked their leader's behavior, publicly battling the judge and their court-appointed defense attorneys at every opportunity and refusing to obey even the most fundamental rules of courtroom decorum. Yeah, this is because, and reporters played up the Rasputin comparison, emphasizing his desert wanderer sorcery. He was a bearded, demonic Mahdi, wrote one journalist, who led a mystical, semi-religious hippie drug and murder cult. Another described him as a bushy-haired, wild-bearded little man with piercing brown eyes. Manson's malevolence was seemingly inexplicable. Even the doodles he left behind on a courtroom legal pad, psychiatrists saw as a psyche torn asunder by powerful threats of aggression, guilt, and hostility. So, with all that said, you know what? This guy was a real jerk. With all that said, it's interesting to note how much of this was played on by, just the sympathies of the courtroom reporters, and how much of it was propaganda, and how much of it was forced, and how much of it was controlled, right, by intelligence. I mean, remember Jolly and West and we're going to get into Jolly and West's involvement with this case. But Jolly and West gets inserted into all of these things. Remember that he's the one who met with Jack Ruby afterwards, and then, he met with him for 30 minutes and then came back out saying this man's had a severe psychotic break, and then no one could interview him again. Right. Now, the question is whether he did that to him. Also, there's a part of the book that talks about, Jack Ruby after the JFK event, after the Oswald event, and the first thing he said when they tackled him was, "Where am I? What am I doing here?" Like he had been out of body. Right. Yes, he was certainly an OG schizo poster of the most schizoidal type. Right. Please like and share, guys. If you want to support the stream, please. I really would appreciate your support. Going through this Manson book, I spent a lot of time reading this book, so that you don't have to, or so that you can and you will if you want to. And I'm just kind of, there's so much in the book that I'm just trying to make my way through some of my notes in the book. We can't possibly cover it all. So I'm just going to try and make my way through parts of it that I think are the most relevant and the most interesting to you guys in terms of this. So when we get to the various characters, the various people, the victims that were killed at Cielo Drive, and we start to talk about some of the rumors, you know, for instance, he who dies with the most toys wins. This was their mentality. This was the Hollywood mentality at the time of Cielo Drive and for Roman Polanski. And this famous quote, you know, he who dies with the most toys wins. It's like, it's almost like pure Levianism, right? It's almost like will to power and win with the most objects. Almost like, you know, you're pretending to be some sort of Egyptian pharaoh. And you accomplish this, ironically, through these occult rituals. And those were some of the rumors swirling around Polanski at the time. Also, I would mention that, you know, part of another prerequisite for dealing with this whole event would be understanding the events of a play like Arthur Miller's Crucible, which plays into this. I mean, the mob mentality of the accused, the women in the book who are, or the accused and the accusers in the book or in the play, are important to understand, because that's exactly how the family acted. That's exactly how the women acted during the trial. It's like straight out of the Crucible, right? Or straight out of the real events. And of course they were doing those rituals. As we covered, Rachel and I covered in our analysis of Arthur Miller's Crucible. And I've covered it a couple of times since, dealing with other things. Let's see. So he hears about, so Tom O'Neill in his interviews with these various characters about 20 or 30 years after the events, hears about how there was a rumor that was strong at the time that one of the things that the cops discovered at the murder scene was a series of tapes, and that they took the tapes and they were either lost or they were erased, but that other people knew about them. And he goes on to interview various members of these elite LAPD squads. I forget, I think it's called LASSO. LASSO is the acronym dealing with the elite LAPD squad that was in league with Cohen. I think they were in league with Cointelpro. I might be wrong, but they're part of an elite squad, and that they had discovered these tapes. And the tapes were made by Polanski himself, so they say, but they say everyone that investigated this was aware of it, and that even Bugliosi made notes alluding to this. And it says, we're going to get into this right here. It's weird that Polanski is out of town when this occurs. I mean, I suppose not, because he's a filmmaker and he's in Europe, and he is he's European. But I always thought that was one of the most interesting things about this. He says, let me see the part about the tapes. He's talking about Frykowski. Let's see. I remember Wojciech telling me that they threw Pick Dawson out of a party. They told Pick Dawson to take his backpack and fuck off. Kazanowski remembered another party a few weeks before the murders where he'd had to kick out two very drunk guys. At the gate, they were standing on the other side looking at Wojciech and me, and they said, "You sons of bitches, we will be back and we will kill you." All the months of partying with Frykowski had a cumulative effect, page 60 of the book. He met so many threatening characters that when his friend turned up dead, he was convinced one or more of them was to blame. He wondered if Frykowski or even Polanski or Sebring had ever encountered Manson or his followers. His concern and uncertainty still felt raw. He was someone who'd been so close to the victims that he'd held on to their possessions for all these years. If Frykowski were alive, I ventured, and Kazanowski could ask him one question, what would it be? Looking down into his wine, he said quietly, "Did you ever meet anybody from the group of people who came to kill you?" That would be his one question, right? Having finished what would be her final film, The 13 Chairs, also known as 12+1, Sharon Tate came back to the Cielo house in July 1969, more than 7 months pregnant. She wanted to have her baby in the house she loved, but Polanski, who was supposed to have returned by then, deferred his homecoming. He needed to continue scouting locations for his next film, assuring her that he'd be back in time for the baby's arrival. He asked his old friend Frykowski to stick around with Folger and keep Tate company. This, at least, is the version Bugliosi provides. Once I'd heard from him about Polanski's tape and the seedier side of Cielo, I started pushing harder in my interviews. Tate didn't want to be alone in a secluded estate, especially at the end of her pregnancy. As for Polanski himself, his friends described him as careful, conservative, even square, and deeply in love with his wife. But they also describe him as something else later. Polanski had established a pattern of abuse, emotional and physical. Page 62. The Sharon Tate they knew, warm and vivacious, was diminished in his presence. The difference in Sharon was incredible, said Elke Sommer, a German actress who appeared with her in the Wrecking Crew. She just wasn't herself when she was with him. She was in awe or frightened. He had an awesome charisma. This meant that Polanski could walk all over her. One friend, who called him one of the most evil people I've ever met, said that he had smashed Tate's face into a mirror and on another occasion forced her to watch a recording of him having sex with another woman. He cheated on her constantly, and he made sure she knew about it. Another friend remembered an incident in which Polanski had asked his wife to wear the same dress that one of his other lovers had worn. When she appeared in her own dress instead, he threw her into the pool in front of his friends. Others said that Polanski hosted ORGIES at the house without his wife's knowledge or consent. They interviewed James Toback. James Toback is the guy that directed Two Girls and a Guy, the movie with, it's a great movie with Robert Downey Jr. It's the one that Robert Downey Jr. got out of prison. He was in prison for heroin. You know, in the 90s, after his series of things, he was found in the baby's crib with a loaded gun. The kid, it was an empty room, but he was found in this strange woman's house with a loaded gun, and he had a heroin and cocaine on him. And, yes, please don't do that. And James Toback is the guy that did that. And remember, I told you I met James Toback because he filmed the movie with Neve Campbell, and then he asked my friend, he wanted a girl I know from New York. I was living in New York at the time. I was acting, and she was an actor. And she has a podcast, too. I got to find the name of her podcast. It's a true crime podcast. I think it does pretty well. But I won't say her name on here. But she was supposed to be in a film with James Toback, and she asked me to go with her to the premiere of this movie because he was a creep. And so I went with her, and I met him. But fuck off, pervert. Get the fuck out of here, right? And anyway, he's of course in the circles of this thing on page 62 and 63 because he says he's aware of the ORGIES that were going on at the house. But again, they don't have any proof of it, but it's hearsay, but still. Humiliations accumulated. And this says she approached Elke for her advice. At a certain point, Tate felt she'd suffered enough. As the humiliations accumulated, she approached Elke Sommer for her advice. Sommer remembered telling her, I'd take the next heavy object, whether it's an iron or a frying pan or a spade out in the yard, and I'd just brain him. Well, should have listened to your friend, I guess. And this talks about Screen Actors Guild comes into this. Easy Rider. We get Dennis Hopper showing up. Dennis Hopper had given interviews to the police. All these people, especially Candace Bergen, all these people are informants, right? Especially after this event, but they're all informants. And then we get into Dave McGowan territory, talking about Mama Cass and Dennis Hopper. Dennis Hopper was with these people. I can't tell the difference between real life and the movies, man. And this is before we even get into Dennis Wilson and Terry Melcher. Okay, so here we go on pages 70 and 71, talking about how Wojciech Frykowski had RAPED, a drug dealer, and Dennis Hopper and Candace Bergen, who was an informant, were there. And I tracked down. Okay, so this is page 71. It took a lot of asking around, but eventually I tracked down both Billy Doyle and this is why the book took 20 years. Do you get it? This is why the book took 20 years to publish, because he interviews every single damn person in depth, which is pretty cool. He says, I tracked down both Billy Doyle and Charles Tacot, Taco, or whatever his name is. As for the other two, I learned Dawson had died of a drug overdose in 1986, and Harrigan was nowhere to be found. Neither had given an interview before, and though they could be cagey, they were also eager to relive their underworld glories. Both were old men now, but they were still operators who acted as if they were at the height of their criminal powers, impressively foul-mouthed. Both of them threatened to have me killed at various points in our interviews, although I didn't take either seriously. They're going to Mama Cass's place. And there's a dealer there that they accused of ripping him off, and then they tied him up and they did things to him. So they thought that he was the one who had done the Cielo Drive murders at first. And he was a suspect. All right, I'm going to skip forward here to we get through Terry Melcher. So just to give you a rundown of Terry Melcher before we get into this, Terry Melcher was the son of Doris Day, okay? And he's a key person in this whole thing because Terry Melcher was a famous producer. He produced the Byrds and, you know, a bunch of the 60s, famous 60s songs. And he was associated with Dennis Wilson and Rudy Altobelli and Roman Polanski, all these people up in the Hollywood Hills and in the canyons, right? Where they were all associated with one another. And so Terry Melcher, of course, is a linchpin in this whole thing, because part of the narrative of this whole thing is that what Bugliosi said was that Terry Melcher had offered Charlie Manson a record contract, right? And that, turn. And that he then reneged on the contract. And so Manson was so pissed that then he said, go to this yellow house and kill them. Now, but the weird thing is that Melcher had already moved out of the house at that point, and Manson was aware of this. They could prove that Manson knew that Melcher was not in the house anymore. So it doesn't make sense that he said, go into the house and kill Terry Melcher, right, when all this happened. Now, the other thing is that Melcher, in his testimony, basically says, like, oh, yeah, I barely knew him. You know, I met him once or whatever, and he had these weird, you know, girls around, and, and there was nothing. It was, and it was too weird, and then I never met him again. He says he met him on 3 occasions. But then Tom O'Neill finds in the records of the interviews, especially with Bugliosi, that not only did he meet him way more times than that, but that he actually may have met him after the murders occurred, that he actually went to Spawn Ranch and he recorded in there. Also, all you have to do is watch Neil Young's interview. There's an interview that's still on YouTube with Neil Young. And the question is, hey, did you ever hear about Charlie Manson? And Neil Young says, hear about him? I knew him. I knew him well. Most people aren't going to tell you that. This is kind of a paraphrase, but he says, I'm not going to tell you that. Most people aren't going to tell you that, but people knew him well. And remember, Charlie Manson does have 2 songs credited to him on Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young albums. And that Melcher took 2 of his songs and removed the Manson credit, even though he had written the songs. His most famous song, of course, is the Look at Your Game Girl song that Guns N' Roses later covered. But you can still get, and I was going to play it. I was actually going to play it tonight, play that song, because I know it's royalty free, but I'm sure there's somebody that owns the royalties to it. No one wants to get popped for playing a damn Manson song. Right? There's a time for living. The time keeps on flying. Think you're loving, baby, and all you do is cry. That's how it goes. It's not a bad song. It's too bad that it's... God damn it, we're going to record this song, man. It's going to be far out. Let's skip ahead and talk about Cointelpro and Chaos, okay? This is page 212, Fomenting Violence and Unrest. I'm going to read pretty large sections of this because it's better just to read verbatim what he says and talk about it than to try and give you a kind of garbled notion of how this plays into it. fomenting violence and unrest. The FBI and CIA launched their counterintelligence programs in the same month. On August 25th, 1967, J. Edgar Hoover issued a memorandum to the chiefs of each of his FBI field offices in the United States outlining the objective of Cointelpro. The name was the abridgment of counterintelligence program. We can read, you can read John Marks and other books to get a better idea of Cointelpro. I recommend that. The name was an abridgment of counterintelligence program, first launched in 1956 to increase factionalism among communists in the United States. Cointelpro had been activated on and off throughout the early 60s, often to vilify civil rights leaders, Martin Luther King Jr., most prominent among them. Go back and look at the Democracy Now! Video about the recent, it's not recent now, but about the letters that came out, trying to get MLK to KYS. Right, KYS. In his 67 memo, Hoover formed a new branch of the operation aiming to expose, disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the activities of black nationalist hate-type organizations. The activities of all such groups of intelligence interest to this bureau must be followed on a continuous basis. Efforts of various groups to consolidate their forces or to recruit new or youthful adherents must be frustrated. No opportunity should be missed to exploit the organizational and personal conflicts of the leadership of these groups, to capitalize upon existing conflicts between competing black nationalist organizations. Hoover specified more than 20 cities where Cointelpro methods could be put to effective use, Los Angeles among them. In a later memo, he ordered the Bureau to pinpoint potential troublemakers and neutralize them before they exercise their potential for violence. Now, remember, Rage Against the Machine used that basically verbatim for their lyrics. And neutralize them, right? Remember, know your enemy? Also, this makes me think of the recent news. Remember the recent news where they unearthed the memo in the Richmond Fed field office about using Catholic groups to expose Dom terrorists, right? Remember in the recent news? That's now. It's in the Richmond field office. Couldn't believe that. So, informants were Cointelpro's lifeblood. I can't believe it. Providing the only effective way for the FBI to learn about and exert influence on the groups it hoped to discredit. The Bureau went to extreme lengths to cultivate solid informants. If it found a convict willing to infiltrate a political group, it would commute his prison sentence. In Quantico, Virginia, at the sprawling Marine Corps base, where the FBI would soon open its own academy, a less formal Hoover University trained agents in the delicate art of passing as leftists. They grew unkempt beards, refrained from bathing for days at a time, parroted radical talking points, got stoned, and tripped on acid. In the Black Panther Party and in Los Angeles, the U.S. organization informants were instrumental in fomenting violence. They would spread disinfo to catalyze an intergroup rivalry, or they'd simply arrange for the bloodshed themselves. Then it talks about the Black Panthers, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaver. COINTELPRO promised the violent repudiation of what Hoover had dubbed a hate-type organization, and the Bureau's strategy was merciless, its results disastrous but effective. In Chicago, famously, the FBI recruited William O'Neill, recently charged with impersonating a federal officer and driving a stolen car across state lines to infiltrate the Panthers Illinois chapter, forgiving those charges in exchange for his services. Doesn't this sound so relevant now? Right? The FBI's role may never have come to light if not for the Citizens Committee to investigate the FBI, an audacious crew of activist burglars who took it upon themselves to break into a small FBI field office in Media, Pennsylvania, just west of Philadelphia. One night in March 1971, the group took a crowbar to that office's dead-bolted door, stuffing suitcases with papers revealing the FBI's domestic spying, which they soon parceled out to the press. Remember, that's also the basis for the movie that we've covered, which was Sneakers. Remember we did that movie? That was part of our Condor stream, if you want to go back to that one. We've covered that. It's kind of a prerequisite. Doesn't this stuff just sound relevant now? It just never changes. The existence of COINTELPRO, page 215, was the single most earth-shaking revelation in the stolen documents, among which was Hoover's incendiary 67 memo, the one in which he pledged to discredit and neutralize leftist organizations. With his pet project exposed, Hoover took steps to end COINTELPRO. Then we get Frank Church and the church hearings, the church committee hearings, select hearings on assassination and MHChaos. So let me move on to that. This deals with, why does this tie in with Manson and this whole group? Because this was part of the MO for, this ties in with the whole helter-skelter idea, right? Which was to, this is on the surface in terms of the media coverage of Manson, and this was where they said that the Manson family wanted to promote this idea of helter-skelter by killing these various famous people, and the LaBiancas, right, which are supposedly the domestic bliss, and then painting these political slogans on the wall, and then blame them on Black Panthers, thereby initiating a RACE war, which would result in Helter Skelter, where the family would go out into the desert in Death Valley, live in a hole in the bottom of the world, and then emerge after the apocalypse and take over the world. That's the narrative that Bugliosi paints in Helter Skelter. Part of that is kind of true, but it wasn't the motive for this. Now we get the CIA on domestic soil, page 223. In August 1967, the same month, Hoover launched Cointelpro. CIA Director Richard Helms inaugurated the agency's aforementioned illegal domestic surveillance program, Chaos, which gives us the title of the book, and MHChaos, which also employed agents and informants to infiltrate subversive groups and then neutralize them. Chaos was born of Lyndon Johnson's neurosis. In the summer of 1967, the president was convinced that the divided, disorderly America he led couldn't possibly be the product of his own policies. Foreign agents and presumably foreign money must be to blame. It's always the outsider. Isn't it always the outsider? It's always someone else from somewhere else, and a small group of infiltrators, right, did this. Just like in Woodstock 99. They did the same thing in Woodstock 99. Right. Oh, these people were so entitled. They did this. They were outsiders. It couldn't be the very people in this country. Richard Helms, or the leaders of such group, right, complied without hesitation. In the 6 years that followed, the CIA tracked thousands of Americans, insulating its informants, information gathering so thoroughly that even those at the top of its counterintelligence division were clueless about its domestic surveillance. Chaos kept tabs on 300,000 people, more than 7,000 of them American citizens. The agency shared information with the FBI, the White House, and the Justice Department. At its peak, Chaos had 52 dedicated agents, most of whom served to infiltrate anti-war groups like their counterparts in the FBI. Undercover, they hoped to identify Russian instigators, though they never found any. LOL. And then, of course, Cy Hirsch got wind of Chaos late in 1974. He told James Jesus Angleton, the head of CIA counterintelligence, and William Colby, the director of the CIA, that he had a story bigger than Me Lie about CIA domestic activities. Colby was forced to admit that Hirsch's findings were accurate, and Angleton resigned from the agency. You can read about that more in depth in The Devil's Chessboard. This story broke on December 22nd on the front page of the New York Times. Huge CIA operation reported on U.S. against anti-war forces, other dissidents in Nixon years. Okay, so now, they talk about Phoenix program. Oh my gosh, hold on, we gotta talk about this part. We got to talk about Phoenix. God, there's so much in this book. Because one of the people that Tom O'Neill gets in contact with, is this guy, William H. Herman. This guy's crazy. This is crazy, you guys. So he says, all right, so I'm just going to get into this part. He says, this is page 226. I can never connect him to Whitson or Manson. Whitson is Reeve Whitson, and we're going to go back to him because he deserves a whole section. But I could never connect, but he certainly fit the profile of someone who'd helped with counterintelligence activities. When I was deep in the weeds of my chaos research, split between feeling that I was onto something or that I was risking my credibility, Herman's was a name that came up several times, usually from sources I didn't quite trust or in arcane articles from the alternative press. What I heard about him was just plausible enough to get me to look closer. I'm glad I did. Herman's story hints at how intelligence agencies may have collaborated with police in Los Angeles. All right, so here we go. He was hailed as a genius, and Herman's work wasn't limited to Los Angeles or even the United States. My FOIA request to the FBI yielded a collection of redacted documents detailing his extensive employment history, concurrent with his time in the LAPD. Check this out. This guy, who's related to this case, he'd worked under a contract for a dizzying list of American intelligence and military agencies: the Air Force, the Secret Service, Treasury Department, President's Office of Science and Technology, Institute for Defense Analysis, Defense Industrial Security Clearance Office, and DARPA. Most of his work for these groups remains classified. You'd think these projects wouldn't have left much free time, but Herman piled on even more work, taking leaves of absence from the LAPD to work his side gigs with defense firms. These had opaque generic names like Electro-Optical Systems, System Development Corporation, and Control Data Corp. This last, a weapons manufacturer in Minneapolis, relied on Herman's services for 10 years, from 1961 and 1971, or so Herman told the FBI. When the Bureau went to Control Data Corp for a background check, the company claimed that Herman never worked for them. You might have guessed, given Herman's long list of government employers, I wondered if his work for these defense contractors could have been a front for the CIA, one of the few agencies that didn't appear on his resume. As usual, official channels were useless. My FOIA request to the CIA for Herman's records yielded the same neither confirm nor deny response that Reeve Whitson's had. So here we get into Phoenix program, and I hope you guys see what I'm doing here. I mean, usually we do a literary analysis where I give you, a breakdown and a take supported by textual evidence on the literary work that parallels some of the factual information that we get in terms of the zeitgeist, where literature can provide truth. But this is different. This is straight up investigative work and, true crime writing. And so I think it's useful to go into these things sometimes because we're in this circle anyway, so we might as well go into it. So I know I'm reading large chunks of the book in a transformative way because I'm offering my take on them. But it's important to give you text-based analysis by reading large chunks of this because it's so interesting and because this is dealing with the Manson murders and how intelligence ties into it. So I hope you guys understand why I'm doing that. Also, please don't forget to like and share and support me. You can drop a super chat and leave comments at any time, which I can read at the end. All right, so it says, I did find, however, a record of Herman's overseas work. This is so interesting. This is like Doug Valentine territory here, right, with Phoenix program. Having spent 4 months in 1967 training Thai police in counterinsurgency tactics, that's Phoenix, Herman returned to Asia in September 1968 to join the U.S. effort in South Vietnam. Documents from the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, listed him as a scientific advisor to the Army, page 227 of this book. His responsibility was to train South Vietnamese police in paramilitary techniques to deploy against Viet Cong insurgents. None of the records described those techniques in any detail, but the mere mention of them was enough to make me put a few things together. The dates of Herman's stint in Vietnam, his job description, his professional affiliations, and his training made it abundantly likely that he was working for a CIA project called Phoenix, one of the most controversial elements in the agency's history. Yeah. Richard Nixon had secretly authorized Phoenix in 1968, and it was so-called discontinued in 71. The agency described it as a set of programs that sought to attack and destroy the political infrastructure of the Viet Cong. Inside Vietnam, page 228, Phoenix operatives waged a campaign of terror against the Viet Cong guerrillas with tactics including the assassination and torture of non-combatant civilians. According to a 1971 congressional investigation, the program violated the codes of the Geneva Convention and rivaled the Viet Cong's own terrorism and its mercilessness. And it talks about during Senate hearings, talking about Phoenix operatives. They wanted me to take charge of execution teams that wiped out entire families and tried to make it appear as though the Viet Cong had done it themselves. The rationale was that the Viet Cong would see that other Viet Cong had killed their own and make an allegiance with us, the good guys. Their attempts were sometimes even more unhinged. In 1968, CIA scientists at the Bien Hoa prison outside Saigon surgically opened the skulls of 3 prisoners, implanted electrodes on their brains, gave them daggers, and left them alone in a room. They wanted to shock the prisoners into killing one another. When the effort failed, the prisoners were shot and their bodies burned up. According to Cy Hirsch's 1972 book, Cover Up, Phoenix had committees set up across all 44 provinces in the South Vietnam. They kept blacklists of Viet Cong fighters and had strict orders to meet weekly monthly quotas of neutralizations, right? Data war, techno war, future war, right? This is Michael Aquino Stockwell territory. The whole operation relied on computerized indexes. The identity of its CIA leader never came to light, but whoever he was there ostensibly as part of the Agency for International Development, AID, later revealed as a CIA front. Herman, of course, was known for his aptitude with computers, and his time in Vietnam coincided almost exactly with Phoenix's operations. I had no way to press him about any of this. He died in 1993. As I had with Whitson, I wondered whether his family could tell me more about him. I found one of his daughters, Cindy, a dog breeder in Spokane, Washington. She invited me to see her. Only a teenager in the 60s, she didn't have many memories of her father's work, but she was confident that much of it had been top secret and that he worked for the CIA. She knew he did undercover work while he was with the LAPD. She showed me his passport. Visa stamps chronicled at least 4 trips to Vietnam between 68 and 70. And among his ID cards was one for the Zwat Nwap Vietnam Cong Hoa. And then she has a framed memo. Check this out. She also shared documents confirming Herman's participation in Phoenix, a framed memo from the U.S. Military Assistance Command, Vietnam, right, which is MAC v. SOG, dated September 9, 1968, tied in with that. Advised all personnel that Herman was a member of the pacification, quote, pacification task force working for Ambassador Comer. Comer, first name Robert, was nicknamed Blowtorch Bob. For his take-no-prisoners approach to warfare, he served 15 years in CIA before arriving in Vietnam to work on Phoenix. According to Senate testimony, he was behind the program's notorious kill quotas. Even Herman's ephemera captivated me. Cindy had held on to a photo of dozens of men on an airplane captioned, "Bad guys leaving a bad spot after having been bad." Holy shit. Anyway, this guy didn't give many interviews, Herman, but he spoke to London Observer's Charles Foley in May 1970. He was apparently in a voluble mood, and he's discussing his work for the task force, LAPD. He described a program of spying and infiltration far exceeding the studies that the group was committed to. His words sounded as though they'd been lifted from Cointelpro and Chaos manuals. He told the Observer that he had a secret plan for forestalling revolution in America. The key was to split off those bent on destroying the system from the mass of dissenters, then following classic guerrilla warfare territory to find means which will win their hearts and minds. He called this plan simply Saving America. It included strategies for deeper penetration by undercover agents into dissenting groups, such as army agents posing as students and news reporters. In a turn worthy of Minority Report, he wanted to use mathematical probability models to predict when and where violence would erupt. He also called for the use of long-range electronic surveillance devices. If informants had already penetrated any dissenting groups, they would secretly record speeches and conversations. The point of this is that they learned that Cielo Drive and the family were under intense surveillance at the time of the murders, and that they may have let these things happen, or they may have produced them in the first place. And he gets that from testimony and records he gets during the initial murder investigation and with interviews with LAPD and Lasso. Okay, so let's see. My hands were tied. The next section is Chapter 8, the lawyer swap. My hands were tied. You remember that in Copland, Robert De Niro? Hands are tied. Hands are tied. I gave you a chance to be a real cop, and you blew it. What, they got no napkins in this place? What, they ain't got no napkins? Go to lunch. Go to lunch. Go to lunch. I gave you a chance to be a real cop, and you blew it. You remember that scene in Copland with De Niro? Right? Sylvester Stallone comes in. Hey, I got some information. You know, what are you talking about? Listen to me, you dumb fucking It's a great movie, dude. Ray Liotta deserved an Oscar for that movie. Best supporting actor, surely. When he sticks a dart up Robert Patrick's nose in that one scene. Oh my gosh, there's so much in this. Strangers in a Strange Land. Okay, so this section is talking about how Manson Manson's lawyer swap, and then the assignment to Roger. I think Roger Smith was his parole officer. Now, what's interesting is that that Manson, although he was on parole and although he violated it a number of times, and the people who were in charge of the system saw that his parole officer knew that he'd violated parole and that he had violated parole, they continue to let it happen, which is weird considering that combined with like the nexus of there's a nexus of parole violations, Manson's connections, Hollywood connections, surveillance state, Cointelpro, and chaos, which all sort of converges on the fact that this is certainly a weird murder combined with the occult things about it. So this says on page 287, as the family was caught, Time magazine picked up on the bizarre parallels between Stranger in a Strange Land and Manson's own nest. In January 1970, it ran a piece called A Martian Model, arguing that Manson had, quote, no powers of invention at all. He may have murdered by the book, as if he's been programmed to kill, right? In Dave McGowan's words, in Son of Sam's words. Okay, so moving on here, before I'm going to go back and talk about Reeve Whitson at the end, and Jimmy Shaver, and Jolly and West. But I'm just going to mention here, we've been going about 2 hours here. We've been going about 2 hours. We could do like 20 hours on this. Or you can just read the book. And you can watch any number of interviews with Tom O'Neill. He's done some great interviews with this. It would be cool to interview him. You know, I don't want to interview often. I don't want to I'm not here to interview people or to talk about to talk to actual authors, because as I've said many times before, you get the wrong, the author of the work or the artist is the wrong person to talk to. But because this is a different kind of work, because this is investigative journalism, it might be interesting to interview Tom O'Neill. You know what? You guys could drop a note to Tom O'Neill if he's got social media and talk to him about, maybe you should get him to come on here and talk to, or maybe I should get Hesher. I bet Hesher could set it up somehow. I bet he would do it. But one of the things that it talks about in one of the later sections is the tactics of the family and of the cult itself. Now we've heard about this many times, and one of the initial things involved in this is the destruction of the ego, right? Destroy the ego. It seems to be one of the first things that's involved in the cult brainwashing, right? And that ties in with the use of LSD, right, and MKUltra. Now, the problem is that we find in this that the acid doesn't work in terms of what they wanted with sodium pentothal, right? Yes, Toledo, never interview me about my own book of the future. Well, that's probably true. Because when I write my book and hopefully get it published, you can interview me about it and I can just read the text from the book. In other words, read the book. It's exactly what I meant to write. But they find that actually it's amphetamine that draws them into this murder mode. And that's going to tie in with Nim, The Secrets of Nim. You guys ever read that? Did you know that The Secrets of Nim and the rats who escaped from Nim, the children's book, is actually based on the National Institute for Mental Health when they were doing the acid and then the amphetamine experiments with the rats? And the rats, when they gave them amphetamine, they ended up killing each other and killing themselves and causing harm, rubbing at the sores on their bodies. And then so the writer of the book said, "Hey, I was aware of these experiments. Wouldn't it be weird if we made a children's book about this? Isn't that crazy?" He said that. So page 307, Negate Your Ego. In 1971, David Smith published Love Needs Care, a memoir about HAFMC's germinal years. I found it rife with details about Manson and the family and about the very period that Bugliosi had omitted from Helter Skelter, the Summer of Love, when Manson apparently, at his most charismatic, began to attract followers and ensure their unconditional devotion. Better still, Love Needs Care had a few contributions from Roger Smith, offering his own appraisal of Manson. Maybe was Roger Smith, was he the guy from NIM? He was from Haight-Ashbury Medical Clinic. I'm sorry. I'm confused. There's so many names in this. Okay, no. Dave Smith is from the Haight-Ashbury Clinic. Roger Smith was his parole officer. My God, if I'm wrong about that, you can correct me in the comments afterwards. One thing about Roscoe says anyone who analyzes clips of Charlie Manson's posse during the court proceedings might question the authenticity of said entities. Look more like actors, agents than animals. Well, one thing that's interesting that Helter Skelter itself, and also this Jeff Gunn book about Manson points out, is that one notable thing about Manson was that some of the things that he did, some of the antics that he did in the trial, like for instance when he lunged across the thing and said he was going to kill the judge started packing heat because of that. They would take him out, they would arrest him, and then he would go into holding. And when he talked to the bailiffs, he was totally normal. It was as if it was an act. It was a thing that he was supposed to do for this production. Now, whether that was based on his own ideas or based on some sort of programming, we don't know. But it was certainly odd in terms of the differences in his personality. This talks about how this says acid was unmistakably part of Manson's tactics, and you have to negate your ego, treating the girls like objects. He eroded their independence, turning them into self-acknowledged computers, right? Mechanical Boy or Phoenix Program, right? Empty vessels that would accept almost anything he poured in. Before long, they obeyed him unquestionably. This is page 308. Acid was unmistakably essential to the process. Typically, hippies who dropped a lot of acid eventually moved on to speed. In Haight-Ashbury, Davis says. A schism grew in the scene. This is the guy who ran the Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, which Manson and the family had a huge interaction with, well beyond anybody else's interaction. The acid heads, as Davis claims to have coined, favored nonviolence, whereas the speed freaks, ditto, caused the rash of violence that destroyed the Haight's live and let live ethos. But Manson had an aversion to needles. He wouldn't use amphetamines. The family's drug pattern was effectively reversed, with Manson urging his disciples to relinquish speed and embrace acid. But speed became a part of the family's lifestyle only later when it came time to kill in Los Angeles. He'd heard from Susan Atkins herself when she asked him to assess her mental health for a parole hearing in 1978. When they went to the South, they got very deeply involved in speed. They got it from the Hells Angels. They were trading sex for speed, and Atkins thinks that Helter Skelter was the ultimate crime. And the ultimate crime was a paranoid speed delusion. Well, I mean, she's just an agent in the thing, but one of the things is that I think the deal over the one that Bobby Beausoleil got convicted of was that Gary Hinman. When they killed Gary Hinman, they tied him up, tortured him for a few days, was based on a speed deal gone wrong. I mean, certainly they were dealing with the Straight Satans, the motorcycle gang, and Straight Satans also had a connection through the contact Manson had met in prison that got him the music contact in the first place, which was a mob guy. But it says, let's see, Bugliosi kept any mention of the family speed use out of the trial. Did you know that? David thought that he understood why. It risked presenting mitigating circumstances for the prosecution. In other words, he's creating a narrative for the prosecution. And the defense wouldn't want it coming up either. No one wants his or her clients to look like addicts. Both the Smiths have said that Manson's fear of needles made speed a non-issue, but obviously speed can be taken orally or snorted. Over the years, a smattering of evidence and firsthand recollections have suggested that the family used amphetamines more often than was suggested at the time. In a 2009 documentary, Linda Kasabian claimed that she and her companions each swallowed a capsule of speed before leaving for Cielo Drive on the night of Sharon Tate's murder. Did you know that? At the trial, she testified that she hadn't taken any drugs around the time of the murders. In the books and at parole hearings, Susan Atkins also later copped to taking speed before the Tate murders. Tex Watson wrote that he frequently snorted it with the group and that he, too, took it on both nights of the murders. Others added that the family kept an abundance of speed at Spawn Ranch toward the end of their time there and that Manson himself wasn't above taking it, especially as he grew more paranoid. He would use it to stay up for days at a time, brooding on his delusions. I mean, that right there negates the sworn testimony. Of course, it's later. So in other words, they took speed on the night of the murders. Here we are talking about NIM. Like the San Francisco Project, this is page 315, and Roger Smith's Amphetamine Research Project, called ARP, like ARPA, right? Some of David Smith's research, according to his academic papers, was funded by the National Institute of Mental Health, NIM, that we just talked about, which, as mentioned earlier, later acknowledged that the CIA used it as a front for LSD research. And though David never mentioned it in his writing, his work owed a clear debt to the landmark research of another NIM psychologist, John B. Calhoun, who'd studied rat populations in 1946. Calhoun's study was a watershed. This talks about what the rats did on amphetamines versus acid. Okay. Page 320 talks about opium propaganda and how that was used against the Chinese and the San Francisco populations in the early 1900s, calling them dope fiends when they were fairly passive. I wrote something about, this was disturbing. On page 323, it talks about Mary Brunner, who was the mother of Charlie Manson's baby, was still lactating, and the girls made a habit of going naked and sucking the milk from her breasts. Gross. But I made a note that it sounds like Stan Smith and American Daddy. Easy girls. Gross. Manson invoked Smith's name from NIM in the trial. And Smith writes Susan Atkins' parole papers. And then we get to Jolly West. Okay, so should we get into Jolly and West? Let me look and see if we got any super chats before we keep going, because I'm going to end this. Oh my God, we've been going for 2 hours here, just getting into this book. So I'm going to talk about Louis Jolly and West, and then Jimmy Shaver and Reeve Whitson, who I think are the three most interesting characters to come out of this whole thing. Suffice it to say that this whole thing so far has been a cursory glance at the intelligence ties and the surveillance ties dealing with the Manson family at the time. So the Reeve Whitson thing is going to talk about how he may have been involved with Manson directly in terms of the murders, or at least being there after the murders were committed at Cielo Drive. And that throws a whole new light on the murders. So again, we'll never know. We'll never know exactly what happened with this. I don't think we'll ever know exactly what happened, but the most important thing is to say that the narrative, the whole point of the book is to show that the narrative that Vincent Bugliosi composed for Helter Skelter, which is the official version of the trial and of the murders, seems to be fabricated in a number of ways, according to Tom O'Neill's book. Okay, so let me see if we've got any super chats just yet before we go on. Let me check it out here. Yo, shouts out to the real John Connor, who sent me $15 on Cash App, and he said, "Zap him with the sirens, man. Zap him with the sirens. I'm an American, man. Zap him with your sirens, man. Zap him with your sirens." You can't go out into space, man. You can't go out into space. That's dialectic physics, man. Dialectic logic, man. It's you either love someone or you hate them. What are you going to go out into space with, man? 1/4, 2/5? That's dialectic physics, man. Look at me, wrong. I should have been a pair of ragged claws sculling across floors of silent seas, man. You don't talk to the man. You listen to him. And a voice. He's got plans for you, man. He's got plans for you. Shouts out to real John Connor out there for that $15. Hey, man, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Shouts out to my friend Thomas Henderson out there, our friend in the chat, Thomas Henderson, Based Thomas Henderson, who sends $20 via PayPal. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much, Thomas Henderson. Let's see. That seems to be the only super chats in that way. Let's look at Dono chat. Yo, Jason or somebody in there, please try look at my Dono chat links and see if you can drop those for me. I can't get to them right now. I got too much going on. You guys also, you can look at the video description. Please support me on Dono chat and on Super chats, you guys. I need the support. Please look at those super chat links at the very bottom of the page. You can support me via super chats. And I would really appreciate those because I need them so I can get more books and I can bring more stuff to you. That would be great. Let's see. Yeah, Token Study dropped $1.99. Thank you so much. You guys, please drop some super chats. Support me. Support your boy out here. I'm trying to read this book so you don't have to. All right. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's go to Jolly West. Let's see. Jolly West. All right, so I'll give you a brief history of Louis Jolly West and what he did here and how he's involved with this. Jolly West was enlisted. He enlisted in World War II, rising in the rank of colonel. This is page 342 in the book. He came to my interest when I learned that he'd accepted an office at the Haight-Ashbury Clinic from David Smith himself to recruit subjects for LSD research. This ties into Operation Midnight Climax, which he'll be a part of. Earlier in his career, West researched methods of controlling human behavior at Cornell University. During the Korean War, he helped to deprogram returning prisoners of war who'd allegedly been brainwashed. This is going to tie into Frank Olson, right? Wormwood. His success earned him national attention. Around this same time, he achieved still more fame when he joined civil rights activists like his friend, the actor Charlton Heston, as well as Dr. MLK, in marches demanding equal rights for African Americans. Ironically, while he was fighting for those rights for some, he was suspected of infringing on those of others. His detractors alleged that through the 50s and 60s at Air Force bases in Texas and Oklahoma, he performed experiments on unwitting subjects using LSD and hypnosis. After the JFK event in 63, West psychiatrically, this is one of his most infamous things, West psychiatrically examined Jack Ruby, who'd murdered LHO. Not long before Ruby was due to testify for the Warren Commission, West examined him alone in his jail cell. He emerged to report that Ruby had suffered an acute psychotic break. Sure enough, Ruby's testimony before the commission succeeded only in making him sound unhinged. He never fully explained why he decided to kill LHO. Let's see. Nearly every psychiatrist and researcher I'd spoke to from Haight-Ashbury had invoked his name, often unfavorably. This was not an excursion to be taken lightly. West had spent last decades of his career at UCLA, where he'd become something of an institution, heading the psychiatry department's renowned neuroscience center. Oh my God, can you imagine if you ended up with this guy? The university had named an auditorium in his honor. So this is West, Jolly West, in 1966, faking a hippie crash pad. He arrived in San Francisco to study hippies and LSD. He secured a government grant and took a year-long sabbatical from his professorship at the University of Oklahoma, nominally to pursue a fellowship at Stanford, although that school had no record of his participation in a program there. The Summer of Love had yet to come, and the Tate LaBianca murders were still years away. West would effectively predict both. In a 1967 psychiatry textbook, page 345, he contributed a chapter called Hallucinogens, warning students of a remarkable substance percolating through college campuses and into cities across the United States. It was LSD, known to leave users unusually susceptible and emotionally labile, as it caused a loosening of ego structure. That language was reminiscent of the reprogramming spiel that Charles Manson would soon develop, urging his acid-tripping followers to negate their egos. When West cautioned against the LSD cults springing up in America's bohemian quarters, he described exactly the kind of disenchanted wanderers who flocked to a personality like Manson's in the years to come. West had a hunch that alienated kids with a pathological desire to withdraw from reality would share forbidden activity in a group setting to provide a sense of belonging. Another paper by West in 1965, Dangers of Hypnosis, foresaw the rise of a dangerous group led by crackpots who hypnotized their followers into violent criminality. Shouts out to the 46 people in the live chat right now. Appreciate y'all being here. Scarier still, they'd had no memory of it afterward. Just because such outcomes were rare he'd argue didn't mean they were impossible. Yo, shouts out to Roscoe, who sends Canadian $20. He says, if not Kubrickon, could you please do an analysis of Dostoevsky's The Idiot or any of these works? Thanks so much. Yes, sir. And also, I'm still trying to get a copy of Kubrickon. And I know I've got so many sponsor streams to do. I'm just behind. I've been busy, as you know, and but not too busy to think about you guys and to remember your sponsor streams. I got so much of them coming up. I promise to get to them in the near future. I'm going to try to get to them all before Thanksgiving. Also, I would love to do Kubrickon and to talk more about Stanley Kubrick because I've been doing many deep dives into Kubrick, and also I'd love to do Dostoevsky. I've done Dostoevsky with Tristan, our friend Tristan, but we need to do more Dostoevsky. So it just takes time. There's infinite books to read, you guys. So, but please keep dropping your book. Please keep dropping your book recommendations. I've had so many great book recommendations that we've done. We've covered a lot here. It'll be our 2-year anniversary here in February. So we've been going a while. I've done many sponsor streams and book recommendations from you guys, and we still got to do many more. Cormac McCarthy included, Don DeLeo. It's just so many. But I'm going to also keep doing the work on the other channels. And these movie analyses, hope you guys are enjoying those because I'm enjoying it. And working on my own book. So please help to support me so I can work on my own book. And then I can share that with you guys. So let's see. Next page talks about Operation Midnight Climax. Midnight Climax was where basically CIA got rented out a crash pad in San Francisco, which ended up being it's a brothel with Jeff Stein McEffrey mirrors. And this is where they made the comment, where else can a red-blooded American, Kill Roip and steal with the, that famous quote, right? With the endorsement of the U.S. government. Basically, these people were completely amoral. And one thing you see as a through line through this all is that a lot of the scientists end up, of course, experimenting. That's what Frankenstein was about, right? Experimenting with their own drugs and their own thing. And then they end up co-opting and then producing the cults themselves, right? And Jolly West is implicated in all this in terms of his alleged involvement with Manson, but also his involvement with Midnight Climax, where they were blackmailing people through the use of recorded creeper activities. So this says, we helped him with his research. He was sympathetic to West's project. He never bothered to find out what was going on. And West, like himself, was diagnosing psychedelic patterns in the counterculture. And then, this says, this wouldn't have been the agency's first disguised laboratory in San Francisco. A few years earlier, page 347, the evocatively titled Operation Midnight Climax had seen CIA operatives open at least 3 Bay Area safe houses disguised as upscale bordellos, kitted out with one-way mirrors and kinky photographs. A spy named George White, that's him, George White and his colleagues hired prostitutes to entice prospective Johns to the homes where the men were served cocktails laced with acid. White scrupulously observed the ensuing activities, whatever they were. The goal was to see if LSD paired with sex could be used to coax sensitive information from the men, something of a psychedelic honeypot experiment. White so enjoyed the proceedings that he had a portable toilet and a mini fridge installed on his side of the mirror so he could watch the action and swill martinis without taking a bathroom break. He later wrote to his CIA handler, I was a very minor missionary, actually a heretic, but I toiled wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun, fun, fun. Here's his quote. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, and cheat, steal, deceive, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest? Pretty good stuff, brother. Son of a bitch. Okay, moving on from there. It talks about Bluebird, Operation Bluebird turning into Artichoke, Frank Olson and Sidney Gottlieb, and MKUltra. Sidney Gottlieb is, of course, the black magician sorcerer of the CIA, And that gets us into, I wrote LOL here. This is funny because page 367, even before his CIA connections came out, West's experiments got him into plenty of trouble. In 1972, he announced plans to build a lab at an abandoned Nike missile base in the Santa Monica Mountains. He would call it the Center for the Study of the Reduction of Violence, or the Violence Center for short. It's so typical, right? So typical. They make this laboratory that they call the Center for the Study of the Reduction of Violence, and then they call it the Violence Center for short. And you know that they are inducing violence as part of the thing to study it. But I just found that so ironic and hilarious, especially in terms of the Reagan quote here, because there's a funny Reagan quote at the end with Charlie Manson, which we're going to end with later. Also, then this gets into Jack Ruby's psychotic break. So here's what he said. This is page 377. This is what Jack Ruby said when he was after the LHO assassination. He says he fired a point-blank range, sending a fatal bullet into Oswald's stomach. According to a first-person account that Ruby produced with a ghostwriter, published in newspapers in a scenario close to Susan Atkinson's and again involving Lawrence Schiller, Ruby, quote, lost his senses when he pulled out his gun. Next thing he knew, the cops had him pinned to the floor and he had no memory of what he'd just done. What am I doing here, he asked. What are you guys jumping on me for? A psychiatric analysis solicited by Ruby's defense attorney said he suffered a fugue state with subsequent amnesia. And then, of course, who is it that goes into to look at Jack Ruby? Jolly and West. They send him in, and then he's totally broken. Now, here on page 386, we get a mention of a book that we've done, which is Libra. This is an excellent book. You should all check this out, and we've done, or just look at my analysis, which is almost 1,000 views. That's not bad for about a year ago, right? Talking about Don DeLeo and the postmodern Cathedral of Intelligence. This says, Libra, Don DeLeo's 1988 novel about Lee Harvey Oswald features a character named Nicholas Branch, a retired CIA analyst tasked with internally reviewing the agency's conduct in the JFK assassination once and for all. The assignment swallows him for 15 years, just like Tom O'Neill. The agency pays for the construction of a lavish fireproof home office, which becomes to Branch the book-filled room, the room of documents, the room of theories and dreams. He reposes in a glove leather armchair surrounded by shelves, filing cabinets, bursting with folders, cassettes, legal pads, and books. Branch sits in the data spew of hundreds of lives. He comes to feel that the past is changing as he writes. And his ultimate subject, he knows, isn't crime or politics. It's men in small rooms. Although I had a sacking sofa, this is Tom O'Neill's impression. Although I had a sagging sofa instead of a glove leather armchair, and while nothing in my apartment was fire insured, let alone fireproof, I identified a lot with Nicholas Branch. I was immersed in records, voices from the past, competing narratives, complexity that sometimes seems to multiply for its own sake. No matter which way I moved, the story shifted beneath my feet. I was a man in a small room reading about men in small rooms. But where Nicholas Branch had the full backing of the CIA, I had only myself. That's interesting, right? I had noticed BLA got an average of between 700 and 1,100 views on all episodes. Go back and watch them episodes while you sleep on silent. Yes, please do. Go back and watch them. Yeah. And, you know, I did get a note about, can you please try? Someone said, hold on. Here's what someone said. ASMR. Hold on. Sir, could you please try and refrain from playing the drum and bass breaks at the end of the stream, as oftentimes I am already asleep and I wake up in the middle of a rave. Very much appreciated, your loyal subscriber. Well, yes, I actually took that as, that's actually not bad. That's not bad. You know, I try to play some outro music and end it with a way to, you know, go out into the world, right? Get hype, right? Get hype. No yap. But I will take that into account, sir, especially on a later stream like this one, where you could listen to the stream and you could be falling asleep right now listening to this, and I'm happy to indulge that, because I know a lot of people listen. I mean, look, you know, oftentimes I go to sleep listening to AJ because I get powerful dreams. right? I want to go into sleep powerful. But you know, we all listen to podcasts and stuff as we go to sleep at night. Some of us listen to Slayer as we go to sleep. Some of us listen to, Mersh and Royce laughing it up. Some of us listen to whatever. But my point is, I'll take that into account, buddy, and I'll play some. I'll try to play some gentle music going out for tonight. Not always, right? Because sometimes we got to go out hype. But please, my point is, please go back and listen to some of my older streams and help me get those views. Help me get those numbers up. So I thought that was interesting, though, that he brings in Don DeLeo and Libra, because again, it's another prerequisite for this, right? I need to be getting over 1,000 streams. 1,000 views for these streams now, seeing as how we're going on. But hopefully we'll keep building. It doesn't matter as long as you guys are here and you enjoy the content and you're getting something out of it. That's and that it matters for me. Talks about skip tracing on page 394. There's the part about Bugliosi being a psychotic stalker. Stalking his wife's milkman on page 396 and 397. Let me just finish off here I'm going to talk about Reeve Whitson real quick. And Jimmy Shaver. Let me talk about Jimmy Shaver first, because this part is disturbing. Let's see, Jimmy Shaver, 370 to 374. Okay, because this deals with the monarch. So my point in reading to you the section of how Jack Ruby responded when he was taken down after the LHO assassination mirrors the same thing that happened with Sirhan, which is this sort of monarch dissociation where, or with what's the guy's name? Or Mark David Chapman, or any of these people, right, that are in the big monarch cases where they are taken down after the event occurs, and they grip the weapon like with superhuman grip, as if it's another person holding it, and then they are completely dissociated, and their eyes are black, and they don't know where they are. Now, this is indicative of a fugue state, but also of when you take into account Jolly and West's activities with this, and MKUltra, MK Delta, and Manchurian Candidate, and personalized, purposeful assassination events, it seems to convey the sense of a useful tool, a mechanical boy, right, in the employ of a larger intelligence group. So one of these things is something dealing with this guy Jimmy Shaver, and so this is disturbing. Okay, but I'm gonna read parts of this, but I'm gonna try and ease it up a little bit with some code. All right, so page 370, and this goes on from the Jolly and West and Manson MKUltra experiments. This is right after talking about Arthur Schlieffen and the forensic psychologist and law professor who'd written a book on MKUltra and CIA. So this says, the curious case of Jimmy Shaver. After midnight on July 4th, 1954, a 3-year-old girl named Sherry Jo Horton disappeared outside Lackland Air Force Base, where Jolly West was stationed. Horton's parents had left her in the parking lot outside a bar. She played with her brother while they had a drink inside. When they noticed her missing, they formed a search party. Within an hour of Horton's appearance, the party came upon a car with her, let's say, clothing hanging from the door. They heard shouting nearby. 2 construction workers had been napping in a nearby gravel pit when a Lackland airman wandered out of the darkness. He was shirtless, covered in blood and scratches. Making no attempt to escape, he let the search party walk him to the edge of the highway. Bystanders described him as dazed and trance-like. "What's going on here?" he asked. He didn't seem drunk, but he couldn't say where he was, how he'd gotten there, or whose blood was all over him. Meanwhile, the search party found Horton's body in the gravel pit. Her neck was broken, her legs had been torn open, and she'd been, Deputies arrested the man. His name was Jimmy Shaver. At 29, he was recently remarried with 2 children, no criminal record, no history of violence. He'd been at the same bar Horton had been abducted from, but he left with a friend who told police that neither of them was drunk, though Shaver seemed high on something. Before deputies could take Shaver to the county jail, a constable from another precinct arrived with orders from military police to assume custody of him. Isn't this weird? It's very weird, right? Around 4 that morning, an Air Force Marshal questioned Shaver, and 2 doctors examined him, agreeing he wasn't drunk. One later testified that he was not normal. He was very composed outside, which I did not expect him to be under those circumstances. He was released to the county jail and booked for RAPE and murder. Investigators interrogated Shaver through the morning. When his wife came to visit, he didn't recognize her. He gave his first statement at 10:30 a.m., adamant that another man was responsible. He could summon an image of a stranger with blonde hair and tattoos. Is this his dark passenger? Who is this? After the Air Force Marshal returned to the jailhouse, however, Shaver signed a second statement taking full responsibility, though he still didn't remember anything. 2 months later, in September, Shaver's memory still hadn't returned. The base hospital commander told Jolly West to perform an evaluation. Was he legally sane at the time of the murder? Shaver spent the next 2 weeks under West's supervision, subject to copious psychological tests. They returned to the scene of the crime, trying to jog his memory. Later, West hypnotized Shaver and gave him an injection of sodium pentothal, truth serum, to see if he could clear his amnesia. While Shaver was under, with West injecting more truth serum to, quote, deepen the trance, Shaver recalled the events of that night. He confessed to killing Horton. She'd brought out repressed memories of his cousin, Beth Rainboat, who'd S-word, A-worded him as a child. I can't say, you know what I'm talking about here. It's sick. Shaver had started drinking at home that night when he had visions of God who whispered into his ear to seek out and kill the evil girl Beth. This Beth was never sought for questioning. At the trial, West argued that Shaver's truth serum confession was more valid than any other, and West was testifying for the defense. They'd hoped he could get an acquittal of temporary insanity, but West's testimony helped the prosecution. While West maintained that the airman had suffered a bout of temporary insanity, he also said Shaver was quite sane now. One newspaper account said he sat through the strenuous sessions like a man in a trance, saying nothing. Sounds like James Holmes, right? Some believe it's an act. Others believe that his demeanor is real. West often treated Lackland airmen for neurological disorders. During the trial, it came out Shaver had suffered from migraines so debilitating that he dunked his head in a bucket of ice water when he felt one coming on. He sought regular treatment, and the Air Force had recommended him for a 2-year experimental program. The doctor who attempted to recruit him was never named. Shaver's medical history was scrutinized at trial, but little mention was made of the base hospital, Wilford Hall, where West had conducted his MKUltra experiments on unwitting patients. On the stand, West had said he'd never gotten around to seeing whether Shaver had been treated there. I checked. Lackland officials told me there was no record of him in their master index of patients, but curiously, all the records for patients in 1954 had been maintained with one exception. The file for last names beginning with S.A. through S.T. had vanished. West had written that he planned to experiment on Lackland airmen for projects that must eventually be put to the test in practical trials in the field. Do you understand? Do you understand what he's saying here? I know you do because you're watching. But do you understand what this is saying? So in other words, this guy, an airman at Lackland Air Force Base, all of a sudden dissociates, goes outside, does this horrible thing, creeper activity, in extremis, literally, right? And then is examined by the very guy who we suspect, because he ran the experiments, caused it in the first place as part of an unwitting patient experimentation program. And this is the same guy that's tied in with all of the other assassination programs and looking at the monarchs, and then is tied in with the Manson case through National Institute for Mental Health and the Haight-Ashbury Clinic and Midnight Climax. So the connection he's drawing here is that if this was the general, Tom O'Neill is drawing here, is if this is the general setting for this, then there can be no proof, because look, even the records are missing. But doesn't this point to the fact that that intelligence uses this as a planned program, that this was part of a larger thing, and that at the very least, this was not the way that the narrative portrayed it in Helter Skelter. Pim says, for $20, thank you for that $20. What do you think of Roman Polanski Chinatown? I read also that there were 3 accidental deaths at the 1050 Cielo Drive home before the Tate murders. The book gets into it. And what do I think about Chinatown? I think Chinatown is a great film. And I think that it's a great film, and it gives us a kind of weird history of L.A. and tied in with, again, creeper activities. Speaking of Ray Liotta and that scene with the dart in the nose in Copland, the same thing happens with Roman Polanski, but with the Switchblade and Jack Nicholson, right? Cut the nose to spite the face. And you know, I think that it's a great film. You know, you can't say that Roman Polanski isn't a great filmmaker, but in terms of what he accomplished in his life and the way that it ties in with all this, it's weird how art reflects life or vice versa, right? The accidental deaths at 105 Cielo Drive. I mean, it certainly seems to be one of those places where, not in like a new agey sense, but like the energy of a terrible event seems to echo into real life, right? And that there was some kind of dark energy that occurred. It's already in Hollywood. And I'm not saying that in a new agey sense. I'm saying it in if anything, I'm saying it in a Christian paradigm where these evil satanic, maybe even he alludes to in the book, purposefully satanic rituals may have occurred. They can't prove it because that's part of it. There's no proof. But that this created some sort of dark thing, which eventually converged in this nexus point where all these people seemed to be agents of, some sort of pyramid system, right? I mean, this is it. This is the case here. And just to illustrate that, I'm just going to end this by talking about this guy, Reeve Whitson, because he's probably the most interesting character to come out of this whole thing. I never heard of him. And 184. Okay, so Reeve Whitson is a guy we don't even know if it's his real name, but all the cops and the ex-cops are talking about this character Reeve Whitson. They're saying in the book that you need to find out about this guy. They're telling Tom O'Neill he needs to find out about this guy because there is a guy that probably knows about what really happened at the ranch, at Spawn Ranch, and at Cielo Drive. And so this is page 183 in the book. Thank you for that super chat. You guys, please don't hesitate to drop some super chats and to support your boy right here. We're going 2 hours and 37 minutes. If you're listening to this later, please make sure you smash that like and leave a comment for me. Who was Reeve Whitson? This is Chaos. Charles Manson, the CIA, and the secret history of the 60s. Okay, before I get into the section, I gotta get a drink here. Give me 1 second, you guys. I'll be right back. Give me 1 second. Intermission for 2 minutes. See, look at that. Less than 2 minutes. Less than 2 minutes. God, you know what? I'm going to keep the headphones out. I hate... Okay, can you hear me? Am I good? I'm going to keep the headphones out for the rest of this part. Because I hate wearing headphones while I'm doing this. It was loud. It was loud in my ears. All right, hearing myself talk all that time. All right, so... Page 183, who was Reeve Whitson? Let's see here. Yeah. Fairly early in my reporting, I knew I could have wrapped up my premiere story if I really wanted to. I had the guts of a great piece, even if it was too late for the milestone 30th anniversary of the murders. I'd spoken to duplicitous celebrities, seedy drug dealers, bumbling cops, and spurious prosecutors. I'd been threatened and cajoled and warned off my investigation, but I didn't have a smoking gun. There was only mountains of circumstantial evidence, and the thrust of my story was still mired in ambiguity. I worried about my reporting, that my reporting could be too easily dismissed, Lee Baca style, as Hollywood fluff. There's Jethro again. Hey, listen, and thanks to Jethro for recommending this book a long time ago. Okay, he got me onto this book. So you guys can thank him for that. Man, God, having those headphones in really gets to my ears, yo. I'm not going to be doing that again. So he says, so I kept going. And as for the first suspects, Charles Taco and Billy Doyle, who claimed to have intelligence connections, and for Preston Guillory, who alleged that police allowed Manson to remain free because they knew he planned to attack the Black Panthers. I thought most of all about the possibility that Manson, of all people, had some type of protection from law enforcement or was even an informant. So he goes into, let's see, from a distance, page 184, this line of inquiry gave me pause. I'd never been interested in conspiracies, he says. I wasn't one to speculate about a second shooter in JFK's thing or faking the moon landing. For the first time, though, I saw the appeal of trafficking in murky secrets. It was an attractive option as long as people believed you. If I found the plot, I could change the way people understood one of the seminal crimes and criminals of the 20th century. He goes on about the big picture, and so he connects with this guy named Reeve Whitson, and his intersections with the Manson investigation suggested a dimension of the Tate LaBianca murders that had been wiped from the official record. So I think this is an appropriate place. We're going to end it after this because this is probably the most interesting part of the book, okay? So this starts with, on page 185, Shahrokh Hatami, Sharon Tate's friend and personal photographer. When I spoke with Hatami over the phone in 1999, he'd never given an interview about the murders. Sorting through his memories, he recalled something he'd never been able to explain. Here we go. At 7 a.m. on August 9th, 1969, Hatami got a frantic phone call from a friend. Rubbing sleep from his eyes, he listened as the caller delivered the terrible news. Sharon Tate and 4 others had been murdered in her home at Cielo Drive. Unwittingly, Hatami had become one of the first people in the world to hear about the murders, all because of his friend. That friend was Reeve Whitson. You with me so far? Whom Hatami characterizes as a mystery man, a phrase I'd hear a lot as I researched him in earnest. A close friend of Tate and Polanski, Whitson had a talent for discretion. When people remembered him at all, he was usually on the periphery, coming and going, his purpose unknown, and his motives inscrutable. He looked his name up in the transcript, official transcript of the court. It appears 4 times, all during Hatami's testimony. And Whitson had never appeared in Helter Skelter, the book by Vincent Bugliosi, which gave an otherwise detailed account of Hatami's story. As well as it should, Hatami's testimony was a dramatic high point. This says, before the packed courtroom, he explained that 5 months before the murders, he'd been visiting Sharon Tate when he noticed someone on the property. Hustling toward the front door, he found short, scraggly Manson standing there. Manson asked if Terry Melcher was around. Hatami, wanting to be rid of him, sent Manson around back. He knew that Rudy Altobelli lived in the guest house and could tell him where to find Melcher. Hatami's story proved that Manson knew where the house on Cielo Drive was and how to get there. That's part of the witnesses, right? Part of this important thing for establishing that Manson knew about the place beforehand. He had a connection to it. And it added some tragic foreshadowing since Tate, Sebring, Folger, and Frykowski were in the room behind Hatami. This would be the one and only time Manson laid eyes on his future victims. The problem, Hatami revealed to me, was that he'd never been confident that it was Manson he saw that day. Interesting. His uncertainty meant nothing to Bugliosi and Reeve Whitson, who coerced his testimony anyway. The circumstances I was put through to become a witness, I didn't like at all. Hatami, you saw that guy. Altobelli said so. We need another person to corroborate it. That's a quote. Presumably, Bugliosi recounts of Manson's visit to the house that day. Hatami demurred, and Whitson turned the screws, effectively threatening him with deportation. He said he'd ensure that Hatami, an Iranian without U.S. citizenship, wouldn't be able to get another visa. If he wanted to stay in America, all he had to do was say he'd seen Manson that day at Tate's house. Not long after, Whitson brought Hatami to his car and showed him his gun. Although Hatami didn't know Whitson too well, he took the threat seriously. He believed that Whitson really had the means to deport him. I was framed by Mr. Whitson, Hatami told me. I was never sure it happened that way. I had to save my ass. Bugliosi knew him very well. I could not have been a witness without Reeve. He was right. Because the defense suspected that Bugliosi and Whitson had indeed coerced Hatami's story, they called on Bugliosi to explain himself at the trial. Let's see. Just Reeve Whitson, And then he says he served the purpose and then disappeared. And Tommy said, like a piece in a chess game. A photographic memory. If Whitson was a chess piece who was moving him around, he died in 1994, so I couldn't ask him. Tommy gave me the names of people who might have known him. Almost invariably, they told me the same thing, that Whitson had been an undercover agent of some kind. Some said he was in the CIA, others the Secret Service. The rough consensus, though, was that he was part of the CIA or an offshoot special operations group connected to it. It seemed absurd the first time I heard it. An undercover agent wrangling witnesses for the Manson trial? It seemed absurd the second and third times, too. But then I kept hearing it dozens of times. Reeve Whitson belonged to an intelligence agency. As I talked to his confidants, a portrait emerged. Whitson had been serious, secretive, and compartmentalized. He lived about 8 lives simultaneously. He had eccentric habits and an eidetic memory. What he did with that memory and whom he did it for remained the subject of feverish speculation. Bill Sharman, a former NBA player and general manager of the Lakers, had known Whitson since 1980. He recalled his friend's photographic mind. He said he worked for the CIA. He told us he was involved in the investigation, but gave us no details. Reeve would tell us the most preposterous things, and eventually we'd find out that they were true. We learned to start believing him. We loved him very much, but he was always a mystery to us. The word cropped up whenever I asked anyone about Reeve. Even those who'd known him well described him as a complete enigma with a penchant for telling unbelievable stories that turned out to be true. Another friend, Frank Rosenfeld, the former president and chief executive of MGM, who'd known Whitson since 1975, called him the strangest guy in the world. He didn't lie, Rosenfeld said. He did not put himself in a position where he told you something and you could disprove it. He was confident that Whitson had some intel connection, no doubt about it. Whitson had an odd tendency to call from payphones. He would call me for hours, and always from a phone booth in the street. And Reeve knew a lot about the Manson situation. He indicated that if they had listened to him, that a lot of people may have not been killed. He was heavily involved. If who had listened to him, I said, I think he meant whoever was looking into it, the federal people, law enforcement. He implied he gave a lot of suggestions. He was involved and didn't listen to him, was bitter about it. He was a cryptic figure. He operated in the CIA. I believe he was on their payroll. Reeve was the kind of guy who, because of his background, but still would turn the inside light of his car out so when he opened the door, the light wouldn't go out. Because he had it that you never know who's looking. He used his thumbnail to tear the top right-hand corner of every piece of paper he handled to mark it. Can't shake the old ways, he would say. With his gift of gab, anything but a military bearing. A man who couldn't be stereotyped. He was infiltrating the town in his incredibly charming way. He was friends with Jay Sebring and Polanski and a buddy of his and the Beach Boys and Dennis Wilson, and he met Manson through all this. Before the murders, oh yeah, their encounter had come through Dennis Wilson. Reeve was the kind of guy who would meet everybody. He would create the infrastructure of the town in his mind. There was hardly anybody that he didn't know. Whitson was in a top secret arm of the CIA, even more secretive than most of the agency. He talked a lot about his training in killing people, implying he'd done it at least a few times. And when it came to Manson, he was closer to it than anybody. Cummings avowed, this is Neil Cummings, a lawyer who'd known Whitson since 1984. He was actively involved with some sort of investigation when it happened. He worked closely with law enforcement person and talked quite a bit about events leading up to the murders, but I don't remember what they were. He had regrets for not stopping them, for doing something about it. He said there were screw-ups before and after, and he said he knew who did it, and it took him a long time to lead police to know who did it. Whitson had the Tate house under surveillance, Cummings added, which is how he knew something was going to happen. Isn't this crazy, you guys? This is crazy. He knew more than anyone else. I'd been hearing a rumor from people inside and outside the case that Manson had visited this yellow house after the murders, that he'd gone back with someone unknown to rearrange the scene. This is page 191. This would have accounted for discrepancies in the positions of the bodies. The killers left them one way and the police found them in another. There were pools of Tate's and Sebring's blood on the front porch, splatters on the walkway and the house. But according to the killers, neither Tate nor Sebring had ever left the living room where they died. The coroner described blood smears on Tate's bodies as if she'd been dragged, again, never mentioned by the killers. Those in the area, including a private security officer, had heard gunshots and arguing hours after the killers said they left. And Manson himself had claimed on a few occasions that he'd gone back to the house with an unnamed individual to see what my children did. Are you guys hearing this? This is crazy, right? The mere mention of this claim made Bugliosi apoplectic. I'd seen video in which another researcher had raised the possibility. So he's positing here that Reeve Whitson, this says, it seemed possible to me that Whitson was the fulcrum, the man who could connect everything, the strange omissions at the trial and in Helter Skelter, the blatant failures of Lasso to follow up on good leads, the suspicion that Manson could be an informant, the murmurs about a narcotics deal gone south. If I wanted to construct a unified field theory, Whitson linked to intelligence work by no fewer than a dozen sources would have to be at the center. Knowing that a lot of what I had was circumstantial and speculative, I contained myself. I had a ton of work ahead of me. But after 20 years, I can point to Whitson as a major cause. So then he goes on to talk about Whitson and how he did not exist. He was born in Chicago, March 25th, 1931. He'd grown up in Indiana. And he ended up sounding like something out of James Bond. He had a Swedish ex-wife. The family lived together in America briefly until in 1962, after the Cuban Missile Crisis came to a head, he sent them back to Sweden, certain that the United States was on the brink of nuclear war. So Tom O'Neill reaches out to his ex-wife, Ellen Josephson, by phone in Sweden, and the ex-wife didn't beat around the bush. She says, he was working for CIA. That's why I am worried to talk to you. Were you sure about that? Yes, I'm sure. She and Reeve had met in 1961 in Sweden. They fell in love in an instant. In those days, he was working undercover as a journalist, producing pro-communist pieces as a ploy to meet radicals. Right. This, he seems to have hoped, would lead to more contacts in Russia, and it was an elaborate scheme. When she found out, she was furious because she was very anti-communist. How could she have married a pinko? He explains that he works for the agency. He was always, in 1962, he was always going off to Cuba. And after the missile crisis, he decided it would be best to send his family back to Sweden. I could never understand, page 194, how he got to know all these important people. He told me that he worked within the Central Intelligence Agency, and he was in part of the agency that was absolutely non-existent. He did not exist. Did you believe him? Yes, she says. My existence was kept a secret to all his friends. When she made a trip to California to see him, he told some friends that she was coming. They were absolutely convinced that he was just making a practical joke because he's got this whole separate compartmentalized life. Let's see. Let's see. Mr. Anonymous. I filed a FOIA request with CIA. Their response was they could neither confirm nor deny his existence. He learns from one of the senior investigators at LAPD about Reeve Whitson and his involvement in the case. So basically his involvement with the case and then his involvement with Bugliosi in crafting the narrative that follows, even though he's supposed to be the one who was with Manson the night of the Manson murders at Cielo Drive, afterwards moving the bodies. In other words, he works with Vincent Bugliosi to craft the narrative to cover it up, is what Tom O'Neill posits here. And also, he worked with Sharon Tate's father. Whitson was working for CIA. Even McGann must admit, I had a story on my hands. He works with Paul Tate. And Paul Tate was an ex-general. Reeve was my main person to help me, Tate said. He'd been a friend of Roman Polanski and Sharon and mine and Jay Sebring. He was very, very helpful. This guy knows everybody, and he's the linchpin in this whole thing. Isn't this crazy? Isn't this insane? And then Curtis LeMay even becomes part of this story. Because he's friends with Charlie Barron, and Charlie Barron was a friend of Curtis LeMay. Meetings between the two were noted by the FBI, who surveilled Barron for decades. LeMay, a former Air Force officer named Bombs Away LeMay, right? Vietnam, had retired in 65 and turned to defense contracting, where one critic feared that he could be more dangerous when he was an Air Force chief of staff. He moved to L.A. to become the vice president of the missile parts manufacturer, but it fizzled, as did LeMay's brief political career. And then it turns out that Reeve Whitson had worked for, I guess, sort of false flag operations against working for George Wallace. And then he meets Otto Skorzeny. Then he's tied in with Otto Skorzeny and the UN. In other words, this dude is everywhere. Reeve Whitson was a walk-in, as one of my sources put it, an extraterrestrial. Once he consumed me, I found myself fixating on possibilities I would have dismissed as insane only months before. His life opened onto a vantage of intrigue where Manson and the 60s counterculture were just one element in a political struggle that encompassed the German people, Cuba, Vietnam, South America, military intelligence, and Byzantine matters of national security. But Whitson was too much the mystery man he was said to be. He brought my reporting to a standstill at a certain point, and that's kind of the design, isn't it? At a certain point, I felt I'd learned everything I could about him without tapping official sources. So he gives FOIA requests to FBI, Secret Service, DEA, ATF, and IRS, and all the military, and all got responses that said they'd had nothing to do with him. It was only CIA that gave me the neither confirm nor deny response. But this guy keeps popping up. And then finally, just to end this, we've been going for almost 3 hours now. I'm going to give you some of the quotes that he speaks to. So Tom O'Neill calls Charlie finally, and he gets through. Charlie has like a handler in prison that handles his outside stuff, and he gets through to him. He's able to talk to him for 5 minutes at the prison, right? And he says, Charlie speaks. He says, God, I had my headphones dialed up so loud. He says, he speaks to him on the phone over in 2000 through these two guys, Pincushion and Grey Wolf. And this is great. He said to Charlie, he said, how does he greet him? He says, hello, Tom. Manson said, hi, Charlie. How you doing? Oh, hanging loose, man. Happy Valentine's Day, I said. Yeah, same to you, man. I only caught Manson's interest because his handlers had told him I had information about potential perjury during the trial, Terry Melcher's. But now that I had him on the line, he wanted to talk about anything but Terry Melcher. I gave him a brief introduction in my angle for Premiere Magazine, which he dismissed as hype. He wanted me to speak to the heart. I rattled off a list of names to see if he knew them. I don't know anyone, man. I barely know myself. Manson spoke in riddles when he spoke at all. He claimed that there was a lot of money behind the murders and that the United States Navy held the purse strings. I'm Vincent Bugliosi's godfather. But he wasn't a snitch, so he wasn't going to give me any names. There's a lot of people playing a lot of games, man. I pitched horseshoes when I was 17. That's so good. Whenever he didn't feel like answering, he'd say something like that. I got 5 red wheels on that truck. Or when Reagan went to Greenland, we locked all the weather stations to the HART project. I think when he says, I think Tom O'Neill didn't understand. I think this is a misprint. He didn't understand what Charlie Manson was talking about. Because a lot of times, honestly, like, look, when you go back and watch the Charlie interviews, it's kind of like Norm Macdonald says. Like, when he did that interview with Diane Sawyer says, yeah, but you killed all those people. And Manson says to her very cleverly, he says, why don't you fly to New York, man? Huh? Don't buy a ticket, just get on a plane and fly to New York. And when you get there and they ask you for the money and the ticket, tell them Charlie sent you. In other words, you're going to do something somebody else told you to do, and you're going to blame it on him is his point, right? And whoever's Norm is talking to at that point says, wow, he was a genius. And then Norm says, well, I don't know about a genius, right? I mean, he also said, my mother's Eisenhower and my father's an icebox. But I think this is a misprint. I think what he actually said probably over the phone was, when Reagan went to Greenland, we locked all the weather stations to the HARP project, not the HART project. Surely he's talking about HARP, right? So that actually does make sense. I mean, because he knows about this. And he's talking about weather machines. But then again, you can't get anything from him because, he's Mirror Man. And look, he is the perfect vessel for this. If it's an intelligence operation and for this thing to happen, and he's tied into Hollywood and he's tied into the drug trade and he's an enforcer for the straight Satans and for the mob, and he's let's say that Cielo Drive was a drug deal gone bad, right? Well, he's Manson is the perfect guy to tie into all that stuff. It's like he says in his interviews, like, I was no hippie, man. I was from the 50s. I was from Eisenhower. These people, man, they look at me and they see what they want to see in the mirror, man. They want to see what they see, man, and they see anything. And if you're going to see anything, you see yourself, man, and that's where it all lies. Right? Well, that makes sense when you're talking a kind of Twilight language dealing with a guy who's been MKUltra to the moon, right, in terms of this event. So who knows what to believe? But with all that being said, I think that, it's interesting because we get through this whole book and then we learn that we don't know the truth of it finally. But it's interesting because we talk about truth in literature and being different from the factual evidence that we see, how that becomes incomprehensible to people when they read. So they need to read parables. They need to read things that are parallel and that point out truth in art. And now this is different because we get both that and facts. We get factual information and truth, but they never converge because we'll never know the reality of this. But I think what's important about reading a book like this is to say that he makes definitely a good case for the fact that the thing that came out of the book, which becomes a narrative in Helter Skelter, it's the number one true crime book. It's the father of all true crime books, right? Vincent Bugliosi's Helter Skelter is, in fact, a narrative, a contrived and constructed narrative, is his point. And he makes a very good case for that. And a lot of it is sort of justifying a lot of the things that we in these circles kind of already figure, but we get a lot of evidence for that in this book. So I would recommend reading it. And that's not even to mention the occult and esoteric elements that are involved in the cult itself, and his sort of neo-Gnostic hippie theology, which plays into this perfectly, right? And maybe the operating force, the operating system that allowed the whole thing to happen. So that is Tom O'Neill's Chaos, Charles Manson, the CIA, and the Secret History of the 60s. If you like that, please leave me a comment afterwards. Tell me what you think. We're not going to be doing like a lot of true crime. I just thought it would be interesting to do that. And also go back and watch my stream on Libra, right? The Theology of Secrets, and the intelligence apparatus, Don DeLeo, postmodernism. Check out Jeff Gunn's book Manson, which is great. Hey, shouts out to First Person Q who drops $10 there. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. He doesn't leave a comment. Thank you, Jason and Jethro and the mods out there. Thank you to everybody who's been here all night. Thanks to the 43 people still in the chat. If you're watching this later, think about dropping by the live chat sometimes. I always do these at night. I'll be doing, as I said, I'll be on Jamie Hanshaw's channel, Out of This World. We'll be talking about Peter Pan Part 2. Going deep. We're going deep, homeboy. We're talking about literature, poetry, classic literature, movies. We're doing movie analysis. We're talking about esoterica and Pan and all things Pan. Somebody got real annoyed with that last one, by the way. They said, I mean, look, don't you know that the word pan means all? And so if you said pandemonium, right, which you said, and then you say panic, which is etymologically related to pan, then pander, don't you know that a simple search would tell you that pander is related to pandarus, and that's a different form of Greek? It's a different Greek guy. Well, it comes from Middle English. But yes, I know that. So I said one word that got out of place, and the person didn't bother to listen to the rest of the stream, and they got real annoyed about it. But that's okay. That's okay. It's anybody's right to be annoyed, but just listen to the stream, dude. Right. Telling me about etymology. But that's okay. So please listen to that part 2 coming up this weekend, though. People get so mad. And also check out my stream with Jim Bob on Jim Bob's Rockfin channel, made by Jim Bob. We did a deep dive into Donnie Darko. Somebody got mad about that one, too. Hard pass. I'm not going to watch this. Right? I hate this movie. Okay. Well, thank you for reaching out on the internet to tell me that. But it's a great movie. What, you hate great movies? No. I mean, you can pass on movies that you don't want to see, but Donnie Darko is a revelatory movie. Sometimes you got to, there's nothing enriching about this movie. Well, that's okay. That's all right. I think there is, but that's all right. I mean, it enriches the soul to understand these things. So... yeah, I know, Bill Hicks. Yeah, and I'm sorry to imitate. I hate doing an imitation of the voice. That was a little low hanging fruit to do that. So I probably shouldn't have done that. But whatever, man. That's the actually voice. So we're going to be doing the Truman Show coming up either this weekend or next weekend. We got a bunch of reach out to Made by Jim Bob on any of his stuff, on any of his social medias, Instagram, Rockfin. You could probably drop him something on his, drop him some super chats or let him know on his YouTube. Anywhere where you find Made by Jim Bob, tell him what movies you want us to do. We're going to be covering those. We're going to be doing weekly or semi-weekly movie analyses, going deep into the movies. We're going to be doing some short form movie reviews too. I don't usually do movie reviews. I do analyses here, but we're going to do some short form movie reviews because he's right. It would be edifying for people to understand movies in a short form, in a brief amount of time. Not everybody has time to listen to 3 hours, and that's okay. It's the internet. You can go back and listen to it. So we'll be doing that in the future. And also I'll be doing, bunch more stuff to come. I don't know what my next... we'll be doing Arthur Macken's Great God Pan with Jamie. I'm not sure what my next book is going to be. I'm still working on my book. Yes. Oh, yeah. Predator. We need to do Predator. I dropped my brief Predator synopsis last time in my own words. So, please, you can super chat me anytime. I'm working on getting the memberships lined up. We're going to have a couple different levels of membership. We're going to have PBR Street Gang, Almighty PBR Street Gang, right? We're going to have Curtsy and Apocalypse Now levels of membership. So hopefully people want to support the channel. Thank you for all the support that you guys did tonight. Thanks for reaching out. Really appreciate. I so appreciate you reaching out. Of course, it's hard to make a buck out there, as we all know. If you want to support me, please reach out using the video description or channel description, Cash App, PayPal, Venmo. You can reach out on Dono Chat, all at Bazed Analyzer. You can find me. Venmo is my real name, but you click on the thing, and you can find me at Bazed Analyzer, Cash App, Bazed Analyzer, all one word, PayPal. All the links are in there. Support me anytime. I really can use that. I need to get more books. I've just, even though I'm covered in books here, we have many more books to do. If you want to see anything, please let me know in the comments afterwards. If you've got any, if you've got any suggestions, for things you want me to cover, leave that, or just comments or funny stories or jokes. Okay, leave me Norm Macdonald quotes. I appreciate that. That's always good for the soul. So thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it, and I'm gonna try to leave you here with some chill Rooks G, okay, to play us out here. So I don't want to wake anybody up on their thing. So I'm going to play some chill Rooks G. Okay. Are you ready to play us out here? Here's Rooks G and a cut off his new album. I'm going to play it low. I'm going to play it real low. Okay. You guys ready? Peace. I love y'all. Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Good to see you tonight. And here we go. Here we go. There we go. That's chill. That should be chill. There we go. This is Rooks J, Cyberliminal. ROXG, Cyberliminal. Please check him out. Is that low enough? There we go. Real chill. Real chill. All right, you guys. Have you ever seen a portal? Have you ever seen a portal? Lower. He says lower. Lower. All right, y'all. Peace. Love you. That was CIA Charles Manson into the 60s. Peace. Love y'all. Oh, yes. Some dono chats just came in. I want to thank RC for that $10. Thank you so much, RC. No message. I want to thank Moldy Apple. I want to thank Moldy Apple for that $11. Thank you so much for that dono chat. $11, Moldy Apple. Really appreciate you. Thanks, y'all. All right, this time. Peace. Have you ever seen a portal? Night-night.